What would you do if your boss handed you a contract? Not a work contract, but a marriage contract. Nathan Reed, a construction foreman covered in concrete dust, stood in a parking lot at 9 p.m. holding a document that could change everything. His employer, one of the most powerful women in the state, was asking him to become her husband. Not out of love, not out of desperation, out of war. Because somewhere in a dead woman's will, a ticking clock had been planted. And if Olivia Sterling didn't have a ring on her finger before her next birthday, she was going to lose everything she'd spent her entire life building. This is that story. If you're new here, welcome. Stay until the end, because this one is going to hit you somewhere you didn't expect. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all started. The job site at Ridgemont Commons smelled like wet cement and burnt wire insulation, and Nathan Reed had stopped noticing both approximately 4 years ago. He stood at the edge of the third-floor scaffolding with a clipboard tucked under his arm and a radio clipped to his belt that hadn't stopped squawking for the better part of 6 hours. Below him, a crew of 11 men was wrapping up the last pour of the day, a retaining wall section along the east corridor that had already been delayed twice because of a supplier who apparently didn't understand what the word deadline meant. Nathan, his site supervisor, a broad-shouldered man named Dale, appeared at the top of the stairwell behind him. Framing crews asking about overtime authorization. Tell them no. Nathan didn't look up from the clipboard. Tell them if they'd started when I told them to start at 7, we'd already be done. Dale disappeared. Nathan made a note in the margin of the inspection sheet, crossed 2 items off his daily checklist, and allowed himself exactly 3 seconds to stare out at the skyline of downtown Hargrove, where the last of the October sun was dissolving into something orange and tired behind the glass towers. He was 32 years old, and he was exhausted in a way that sleep didn't fully fix anymore. That wasn't a complaint. It was just a fact he'd made peace with somewhere around the time his daughter turned 4, and he realized the exhaustion was permanent. But so was she, and the math still worked in his favor. His phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket and read the message from his sister Diane. Emma's already eaten. She wants you to read the Dragon book again tonight. I told her you'd be late, but she said, and I quote, "Daddy's never too tired for dragons." He smiled at that. A real one, not the polite version he handed out at job sites. "Tell her I'll be there by 8, he typed back. "Save me something." "There's a plate in the microwave. It's meatloaf. Don't make the face." He was, in fact, already making the face. He put the phone away, grabbed his hard hat from the hook on the stairwell railing, and started down toward the ground floor. Around him, the site was beginning its end-of-day ritual. Machines powering down, voices getting looser, boots scraping across temporary plywood floors. Nathan moved through it all with the automatic competence of someone who had done this so many times that his body navigated the obstacles before his brain finished processing them. He was almost to the trailer, the small on-site office where he filed paperwork and changed out of his work boots, when the black SUV pulled into the lot. He noticed it because it didn't belong. The lot was full of pickup trucks, flatbeds, and a concrete mixer that was older than most of his crew. The SUV was clean, in a way that things didn't stay clean on construction sites, with tinted windows and a Hargrove Real Estate Company logo on the door panel that Nathan recognized immediately. Sterling Development Group, his employer. Technically. He was employed by Ridgeline Construction, which was currently contracted to Sterling Development Group, which meant that somewhere at the top of a very long corporate chain, the woman who owned this project also owned, loosely, a portion of his working hours. He'd met her twice, once at a groundbreaking ceremony where she'd shaken his hand and said something about appreciating the work, and once at a safety review meeting 6 months ago where she'd asked 3 questions that demonstrated she actually understood load-bearing specifications, which had surprised him more than he was willing to admit. Olivia Sterling. The door of the SUV opened and she stepped out, and Nathan felt the small, involuntary recalibration that most people experienced the first time they saw her in person. Not because she was beautiful, she was, objectively, but that wasn't the thing. It was the way she carried herself, like someone who had long ago stopped waiting for permission to be in any room she walked into. She was wearing a charcoal blazer over a dark blouse, her dark hair pulled back, no jewelry except a watch, no entourage, no assistant trailing behind her with a tablet and a nervous expression. Just her, in a construction parking lot, looking directly at him. Mr. Reed. She didn't raise her voice to cross the distance between them. She walked toward him instead, and her heels on the gravel made a sound that seemed completely unbothered by the terrain. Do you have a few minutes? Nathan looked at his watch. It was 8:47 in the evening. I have a plate of meatloaf waiting for me at home, he said, so I'm hoping this won't take long. Something crossed her face, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. I'll try to be brief. They sat in the trailer. Nathan cleared a stack of inspection reports from the second folding chair and set them on the floor, and Olivia Sterling sat down across from him like she sat in folding chairs every day of her life. He pulled 2 paper cups from the dispenser beside the ancient coffee machine and poured what was left from the afternoon's brew without asking if she wanted any. She took the cup without commenting on its temperature or its probable age. He respected that more than he expected to. How's the east wall section coming? She asked. Delayed 2 days. Supplier issue. He wrapped both hands around his own cup. We'll make it up. It won't affect the overall timeline. I know, she said. I wasn't asking to check on the project. He looked at her. She was looking at her coffee cup with the expression of someone working through how to say something that didn't have a clean way to be said. Then what were you asking? Small talk, she said. I'm not very good at it. I find it easier to start with something I actually know about before I get to the part I don't know how to say. All right. He leaned back. The folding chair made a noise that suggested it had opinions. What's the part you don't know how to say? She set the cup down, reached into the interior pocket of her blazer, and placed a folded document on the table between them. Not a building plan, not a contract amendment, something else. The paper was thick and cream-colored, the kind of stationery that cost more per sheet than Nathan's morning coffee. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to hear the entire explanation before you respond, because if you respond before you hear the whole thing, your answer will be no, and you'll miss the part where it actually makes sense. That's a lot of setup. It requires a lot of setup. He didn't reach for the document. Okay, I'm listening. She was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, he realized, but organizing, like she was deciding which version of this to give him. He'd met a lot of people in his life who were calculating in that moment of quiet. With her, it felt different. It felt like precision rather than manipulation, like a surgeon deciding where to make the cut. My grandmother died 14 months ago, she said. Margaret Sterling. You might have seen her name on some of the older buildings downtown. She built Sterling Development from nothing after my grandfather passed. She was 79, she was sharp until the end, and she loved the company the way some people love their children. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. A brief pause. She also, in her considerable wisdom, decided to include a clause in her estate trust that I am only now fully appreciating the destructive potential of. Nathan said nothing. He waited. The trust controls my access to the majority of my shares in Sterling Development, Olivia continued. My grandmother believed very strongly that business and family were not separate things. She built the company while raising 3 children and being married for 51 years, and she didn't understand, or maybe didn't want to understand, how someone could run a company properly without also being rooted in something outside it. So the trust requires you to be married. She looked at him. I told you to wait for the whole explanation. Sorry, keep going. The trust requires me to be married by my 31st birthday, she said, which is November 18th, which is 31 days from today. The trailer was quiet. Outside, Nathan could hear the last of the crew finishing cleanup, doors slamming, engines starting. If I'm not married by that date, Olivia continued, control of my voting shares temporarily transfers to the trust's designated secondary beneficiary, while the estate goes through a 6-month administrative review. That person is my uncle, Gerald Sterling. And Gerald's not a good option. Gerald has been trying to dismantle the affordable housing division of this company for 11 years. Her voice didn't change temperature exactly, but something behind it went very still. The Ridgemont Commons project, this project, exists because I have protected that division from his budget proposals every single year since I took over. If Gerald gains control, even temporarily, the first thing he will do is pull funding from every low-income development we have in progress. 14 projects, approximately 4,000 units, several thousand jobs if you count the contracted labor. Nathan looked at the table, at the cream-colored document sitting between them. You can't get married in 31 days, he said slowly. Not to someone you actually... No, she agreed. So you need a legal marriage, she said. Temporary. 1 year, which is the duration of the administrative review period. After that, the shares revert back to me unconditionally, and we can quietly divorce with no further obligations on either side. The trailer settled into a silence that was doing a lot of heavy lifting. Nathan picked up his coffee cup. It was cold. He drank it anyway. Why me? He finally said. It was a fair question, and Olivia had prepared for it, which meant she'd thought about the honest answer and decided it was less dangerous than a diplomatic one. Because I've had 3 months to think about who I could trust with this, she said, and your name kept appearing on the list and no one else's name was staying on it. I work construction. I don't have connections. I don't need connections. I need someone who won't use this situation against me. She looked at him directly. I've done my research, Mr. Reed. I know you've been offered kickbacks by suppliers twice in the last year and turned both of them down without reporting it to anyone because you didn't want the drama. I know you covered the medical copay for one of your crew members out of your own pocket when his insurance lapsed. I know you've had this job for 4 years. You've never been late on a deadline. And in 4 years of working with my contracted crews, I have never once received a complaint about you from a single worker on any of your sites. That's a lot of research. I'm a thorough person. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you're asking me to lie to the entire world for a year. I'm asking you to be legally married to me for a year. The feelings don't need to be real. The paperwork does. And my daughter? Something shifted in her expression. Not softening exactly, but a kind of careful stillness. She would live in my home. She'd have stability, resources, and I'd like to think a better than average chance of having her needs met. I would not interfere with your parenting. And when it ends, you walk away. With a financial settlement that would give you enough to buy a house outright, fund your daughter's education, and probably eliminate most of the stress that's currently making you look about 10 years older than you are. Nathan's mouth twitched despite himself. That's a little direct. I told you I'm not good at small talk. He stood up, walked to the window of the trailer, and looked out at the parking lot. The last of the trucks were pulling out. The site was almost empty. The east wall section sat half-finished in the dark, concrete gleaming faintly under the floodlights, and he thought about what she'd said. 4,000 units. Several thousand jobs. You said you trust me, he said without turning around. Why? You don't know me. I know your record. I know your reputation among your crew. I know you turned down a bribe that would have paid off 2 years of your daughter's daycare costs and you didn't tell anyone about it because you weren't doing it for credit. A pause. That's more than I know about most of the people I've known for years. He turned around. I need to think about it. Of course. I need a week. You have 3 days, she said without apology. After 3 days, I have to start exploring other options, and I'd rather not. He picked up the document from the table and held it without opening it. What's in here? The preliminary framework of the arrangement. Nothing binding, just an outline for the lawyers to work from once you decide. Or to discard, if you decide otherwise. She stood, straightened her blazer, picked up her untouched paper cup and set it beside the coffee machine. Thank you for the coffee. It was terrible. Yes, she agreed, but you offered it, and that was the part that mattered. She left. The trailer door swung shut behind her, and Nathan stood in the fluorescent quiet holding a cream-colored document and thinking about his daughter and 4,000 housing units, and a woman who had done her research and made her case and was now, apparently, waiting for an answer. He looked down at the paper in his hands. Then he thought about the meatloaf getting cold. He turned off the lights, locked the trailer, and drove home. Emma was asleep by the time he got there. His sister Diane was on the couch with a glass of wine and a book she hadn't been reading, which was her way of waiting up without technically waiting up. She looked at him over the rim of her reading glasses when he came through the door, took in his expression, and put the book down. Long day. Yeah. Meatloaf's in the microwave. I know. He sat down on the couch beside her and didn't take his coat off. He was still holding the document. Diane looked at it. What's that? Something I need to think about. Does it involve a crime? No. Does it involve a woman? He looked at her. She looked back at him with the particular expression of an older sister who has been reading people for 37 years and has gotten very good at it. It involves my boss, he said. Your boss. Olivia Sterling. Diane put her wine glass down slowly. The billionaire. Yes. Nathan. She turned to face him fully. What does a billionaire want with you? No offense. Some offense. Fine. What does a billionaire want with my brother, who is a very good person, but is currently wearing the same work boots he bought in 2019 and smells like concrete? He told her. All of it. He laid it out the same way Olivia had, methodically, completely, without softening the strange parts, because the strange parts were all of it, and softening them would have made the whole thing sound like a lie. Diane was quiet for a long time after he finished. She wants you to marry her, she said finally. On paper. For a year. That's right. And in exchange, your financial situation would change significantly. He looked at his hands. But that's not the thing I keep thinking about. What are you thinking about? 4,000 families, he said, who might not have housing if this falls through. A beat. I've built some of those units, Diane. I know what that work is. I know what goes into it. The idea that someone could just pull the plug on all of it because of a bureaucratic clause in some dead woman's will. Nathan, Diane put her hand on his arm. You can't save the world. I'm not trying to save the world. I'm trying to decide if I can spend a year of my life doing something uncomfortable so that a few thousand people don't lose their homes. Diane was quiet for a moment. What about Emma? Better school, better neighborhood, more stability. He exhaled. Better than what we have now. You have a good life. I have a fine life, he said. There's a difference. Another silence. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Somewhere upstairs, Emma made a small sound in her sleep, the kind of half-word noise she'd made since she was an infant, like she was narrating her dreams to an audience only she could see. Is she? Olivia Sterling? Is she trustworthy? Diane asked. In your gut. Nathan thought about the way she'd sat in a folding chair without flinching, about the way she'd handed him terrible coffee and said the part about it mattering that he'd offered, about the way she'd listed his record not to flatter him, but because she'd needed to explain her decision, and she was the kind of person who backed her decisions with evidence. I think so, he said. You think, or you know? Nobody knows, he said. You never know anyone until something tests it. Diane picked up her wine. Looked at it. This is the most insane thing you've ever considered doing. I know. You're going to do it, aren't you? He didn't answer right away. He sat there in the low light of the living room, coat still on, documents still in his hands, listening to the refrigerator and the distant sound of his daughter talking to her dream. I'm going to sleep on it, he said, but they both knew that wasn't really an answer. He called Olivia Sterling the next evening. She picked up on the second ring, which told him she'd been waiting even if she'd never admit it. I have conditions, he said, without preamble. A brief pause. Go ahead. Emma doesn't know it's not real. She's 6. She's already lost her mother. He stopped, recalibrated. She doesn't need another disappearing act. If we do this, we treat her like she's part of a real family for the duration. No confusion, no cold shoulders, no, this is just Daddy's work colleague energy. If you're going to be in the house with her, you're present. Understood. I keep my job. I'm not becoming a kept man. I'll attend whatever events you need me to attend. I'll do whatever the public-facing obligations are, but I work my schedule. That's fine. It actually helps the optics. You're not suddenly quitting your job to live off my money. It looks more genuine. Second, the settlement money, the financial arrangement, gets put in trust for Emma's education first. Whatever I keep for myself is secondary. She was quiet for a moment. That's not what most people would prioritize. I'm not most people. You said so yourself. Fair point. Agreed. And last. He took a breath. If at any point this stops being manageable, if you're using me, if the story changes, if I find out any part of what you told me was a lie, I walk. No penalty clauses, no legal repercussions, clean exit. Also agreed. A pause. For what it's worth, Mr. Reed, I intend to be honest with you about everything relevant to this arrangement. I'm not good at many social things, but I am good at honesty. People generally find it off-putting. I find it refreshing, he said. I deal with enough people who aren't. Does that mean yes? He was standing in his kitchen. Emma's drawings were stuck to the refrigerator with alphabet magnets. A horse, a house, a dragon that looked like it was having a very good day. The kitchen was small, and the tile above the sink had a crack in it that he'd been meaning to fix for 8 months. That means yes, he said. Silence on the other end. Not a long one. Thank you, she said. And the way she said it, without any performance behind it, without any of the polished delivery of a woman used to negotiating, told him something about what this had cost her to ask. Don't thank me yet, he said. We haven't gotten through the hard part. No, she agreed. We haven't. The wedding happened 12 days later. It was nothing like the word wedding typically implied. No ceremony, no flowers, no guests. Just a civil office in downtown Hargrove, 2 attorneys who had spent the better part of a week building a contract so detailed it contained subclauses about household schedule conflicts and media appearance protocols, a judge who looked like he had seen every variety of human complication and was unsurprisable, and 4 people in a fluorescent-lit room on a Tuesday afternoon. Nathan wore his best button-down shirt, which was navy blue, and had been ironed that morning by Diane, who had insisted on ironing it while simultaneously telling him he was insane and that she loved him, and that he'd better come to Sunday dinners or she'd drive to the mansion and make a scene. Olivia wore a gray dress that cost more than his monthly rent, and still somehow managed to not look like she was trying to impress anyone. The rings were plain gold bands that her attorney had sourced. Functional, appropriate. When the judge asked Nathan if he took Olivia Sterling to be his lawfully wedded wife, Nathan said, "I do," in a clear, steady voice, and felt something in his chest that he couldn't immediately classify. Not nervousness exactly, and not the hollow feeling he'd braced himself for. Something more complicated. Something that landed somewhere between gravity and the specific kind of calm that comes right before something changes. When Olivia said, "I do," she was looking at him directly, the way she'd looked at him in the trailer the first night, and he had the thought, brief, irrational, that she was reading him, checking whether he was going to flinch. He didn't flinch. The judge signed the papers. The attorneys filed their copies, and Nathan Reed and Olivia Sterling walked out of the Hargrove Civil Courthouse into a gray November afternoon as, legally, officially, and entirely without romantic precedent, husband and wife. Olivia's driver was waiting. She paused by the car and turned to him. "My house. Our house, I mean. You can move the rest of your things in this weekend. I've had the East Guest Suite prepared." "Guest Suite," he said. "You'll have your own space." A slight pause. Obviously. Obviously, he agreed. She nodded once, got in the car, and left. Nathan stood on the courthouse steps and watched the SUV pull into traffic, and then he pulled his phone from his pocket and sent Diane a single message. "It's done." 3 dots appeared immediately. "I'm making Sunday dinner for 3. Don't be late." He put the phone away, turned up his collar against the November cold, and walked to his truck, which was parked 2 blocks away, and had a check engine light he'd been ignoring since September. Husband. That was a word he hadn't used about himself in a long time. He drove home to pack his boxes. The Sterling house was not a house. Technically, it qualified as one. It had walls, rooms, a roof, but the word house did the thing a profound injustice. It sat behind iron gates in the Cliffside district on a piece of property that backed up to a ravine surrounded by old oak trees that had apparently been there longer than the neighborhood. 6 bedrooms, a proper library, a kitchen that was 3 times the size of Nathan's old apartment, and more hallways than he initially thought were necessary. Emma, on the other hand, thought there were exactly the right number of hallways, because hallways, in her assessment, were for running. She'd been quiet for the first 30 minutes of the tour, a deeply uncharacteristic silence that told Nathan she was overwhelmed and was processing it in the way 6-year-olds process things, by going very still and then, without warning, exploding. The explosion came in the form of her sprinting down the main corridor on the 2nd floor with her sneakers squeaking on the hardwood, arms out, narrating her own running to herself in a low, continuous commentary that he could hear but not quite decipher. Olivia was standing beside him watching this. He waited for the subtle wince, the slight recalibration of expression that people did when they realized a child was more kinetic than they'd planned for. Instead, she said, "She's fast." "She's always been fast," he said. "I don't know where she gets it." "Does she have a room preference?" "I had both rooms made up. The blue one faces the back garden. The yellow one faces the oak trees." "Oak trees," he said, without hesitation. "She's been obsessed with climbing trees since before she could actually climb." Olivia nodded, filed it away somewhere. "I'll have the furniture adjusted." Emma came thundering back down the hallway, skidded to a stop in front of Olivia, looked up at her with the unfiltered appraisal that only small children and customs officers can get away with, and said, "Do you have any dogs?" Olivia blinked. "No." Emma considered this. "Do you want one?" "Emma," Nathan said. "What? Dogs make houses feel like homes. My teacher said so." "Your teacher said that?" "She was talking about a book, but I think it's true for regular life, too." Olivia looked down at Emma with an expression Nathan couldn't read. Something complicated was passing through it. Not discomfort, not performance. Something closer to surprise. Like Emma had walked straight past all of Olivia's external architecture and knocked on a wall she didn't know was there. "I'll think about it," Olivia said. Emma nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer, and sprinted off again. Nathan watched her go. "I'm sorry, she doesn't really have a filter." "Don't apologize for that," Olivia said. Her voice was careful in the way of someone being careful without wanting to show they're being careful. "It's fine. She's fine." He looked at her sideways. She was watching the empty hallway where Emma had disappeared around the corner, and her face had a quality he hadn't seen on it before. Quiet. A little unguarded. Like the house had shifted around her and she hadn't entirely accounted for what it would feel like. "You haven't had much of this, have you?" he said. "This kind of noise," she said. "No." "Is it a problem?" She looked at him, looked back at the hallway. "No," she said. "It's not a problem." And he believed her. The first week was mostly logistics. They settled into a rhythm that was fundamentally practical. Nathan left for the site at 6:30. Olivia was already gone or about to leave before he came downstairs. Emma went to her new school, which was, Nathan noticed, genuinely exceptional, with a library that had beanbag chairs shaped like animals, and a science room that smelled like vinegar and possibility. In the evenings, they ate dinner in the large kitchen, not in the dining room, which Nathan found aggressively formal, and the conversation was mostly Emma's. Emma, as it turned out, was extraordinarily good at filling silence. She talked about her new classroom, about a girl named Priya who had let Emma borrow her sparkle pencil, about a book she was reading that had a dragon in it who was also a librarian, which she found both believable and aspirational. She asked Olivia questions without preamble or apparent concern for whether they were appropriate. "What do you do at work? Do you ever get bored at meetings? Do you like meatloaf?" Olivia's answer to the last one: "I genuinely don't know. I haven't eaten it in years." Nathan watched Olivia during these dinners more than he watched his food. She was not natural with children in the way some adults were, the easy, effortless naturalness of people who immediately drop to a child's level and make it seem like they've always lived there. Olivia was careful. She answered Emma's questions directly, which was exactly the right instinct, because Emma could detect condescension the way dogs detect fear and responded to it similarly. She remembered things Emma said and referenced them the next day, which Emma noticed immediately and which visibly pleased her. It was effort, Nathan recognized. She was putting in genuine effort, and she wasn't advertising the effort, which made it worth more. On Friday of the first week, he came home to find Olivia and Emma at the kitchen island. Emma was on her knees on a stool, elbows on the counter, and Olivia was beside her, jacket off, sleeves pushed up, helping her sound out a word in her reading book. Nathan stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment without either of them noticing him. "Try it slower," Olivia was saying. "Break it into pieces." Misunderstood, Emma said, putting the syllables together with the concentrated effort of someone diffusing something. "Misunderstood. There you go." "That's a sad word," Emma said. Olivia looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Misunderstood. It means nobody gets you." Emma scrunched her nose. "That must feel very lonely." Olivia was quiet for a beat. "Yes," she said. "I imagine it does." Nathan pushed off from the doorway and made enough noise with his keys that they both looked up. Emma launched herself off the stool and crashed into him with both arms, which was her standard greeting and had been since she was approximately 2 years old. "Daddy, Olivia helped me read a hard word." "I heard." He looked over Emma's head at Olivia, who had straightened and was pulling her sleeve back down, arranging herself back into the more composed version of herself that was apparently the default. "Thanks." "She's good at it," Olivia said. "The reading. She just needs to slow down." "She does everything fast," he said. "I keep telling her, speed isn't always—" "It's usually fine," Emma said from somewhere around his midsection. "It's usually fine," he agreed and met Olivia's eyes. And something passed between them that was brief and warm and entirely without planning. A shared moment of amusement, the specific kind that forms when two people encounter the same small truth at the same time. It lasted only a second. But it was the first real one. Their first public appearance was a charity gala 3 weeks into the arrangement. The Hargrove Foundation's annual dinner, 500 guests, press at the entrance, a dress code that made Nathan look at his closet and feel the specific despair of a man who owned exactly 3 suits and had no idea if any of them were appropriate. Olivia's assistant, a precise, efficient woman named Clara, who communicated exclusively in concise emails and expressions of neutral competence, sent a car to take him to a tailor 2 days before the event. Nathan sat in the back of the car feeling mildly ridiculous, then spent an hour in a shop where a small man with measuring tape made him feel like a building undergoing structural assessment, and came out with a dark suit that apparently cost more than his first paycheck and fit in a way his other suits never had. Emma had opinions about it. "You look like a dad in a movie," she said, which she meant as a compliment, and which landed somewhere between flattering and humbling. The night of the gala, he met Olivia at the base of the main staircase. She came down in deep burgundy, a dress that did not announce itself loudly, that had no particular drama in its construction, but that somehow managed to take up exactly the right amount of space in a room. Her hair was down. She was wearing earrings he hadn't seen before. Small, not trying too hard. She was also, he noticed, carrying the expression of someone who has attended 500 of these events and is profoundly tired of them. She stopped in front of him, looked at the suit. "Good," she said. "High praise." "In my world, good is high praise." She straightened his lapel, a small adjustment, automatic and brief. "How are you with crowds?" "I manage construction crews. I've handled chaos in worse settings than a dinner party." "This isn't chaos. This is politics in formal wear, which is considerably worse." She looked at him levelly. "Stay close. Follow my lead on introductions. If someone asks how we met, the story is that we met at a project review meeting 6 months ago and kept in touch. If someone asks about the wedding, it was small, private, intentional. And if someone asks if I love you?" A brief pause. Something shifted in her expression, a flicker that was gone before he could identify it. "Tell them yes," she said, "and mean it a little. It reads better." He offered his arm. She took it, and they walked out to the waiting car. And Nathan thought that he had built hospitals and bridges and load-bearing walls for a living, and that somehow none of it had prepared him for the particular weight of walking into a room with Olivia Sterling on his arm, pretending to be a husband. The night was long and full of names he was expected to remember and conversations he was expected to navigate, and he did it. Not gracefully, not perfectly, but solidly, which was really all he knew how to be. What he didn't expect was to catch her laughing, genuinely, at something a 70-year-old board member said near the bar, the full, unguarded version of a laugh she apparently kept for moments when she forgot to be composed, and to feel something in his chest shift, quietly, in a direction he hadn't cleared with himself. That was how the first 3 weeks ended, not with a revelation or a crisis or a dramatic shift, with a laugh at a party that wasn't meant to be real, and a feeling he didn't entirely know what to do with yet. The second month was harder than the first, and not for the reasons Nathan had anticipated. He'd expected the logistics to be hard, the scheduling, the public appearances, the daily navigation of a house that was 6 times the size of anything he'd lived in before. He'd expected to feel out of place, to bump against the edges of a world that hadn't been built with him in mind. He'd expected awkward silences and the low-grade stress of maintaining a performance for strangers. What he hadn't expected was that the performance would start feeling less like performance and more like something else he didn't have a clean word for. It started with small things. The way Olivia left the coffee machine ready every morning, not for herself because she was usually out the door before it finished brewing, but clearly calibrated for the time Nathan came downstairs. He noticed it on a Tuesday, the third week, a full carafe, still hot, at exactly 7:15. He didn't mention it. She didn't offer any explanation. But the next morning, it was there again, and the morning after that, and he started to understand that she was the kind of person who expressed consideration through action and would rather be caught at it than have it named. Emma, for her part, was adapting with the cheerful completeness that only children can manage. She had claimed the room facing the oak trees and had already hung 3 of her drawings on the wall: the dragon, a horse, and a new one she'd made at school that depicted what she described as our family, which included Nathan, Olivia, and an optimistically sized golden retriever that did not yet exist. When Nathan pointed out that they didn't have a dog, Emma had said yet, with the confidence of someone who considers that detail a formality. Olivia had not said anything about the drawing on the wall, but Nathan had seen her pause in the doorway of Emma's room one evening when Emma was asleep, looking at it for a moment with an expression he couldn't quite name, something that lived between moved and frightened, the way a person looks when they want something they haven't fully admitted to themselves yet. He hadn't said anything about that either. There were a lot of things in those early weeks that neither of them said. The board meetings were a different kind of education. Olivia had briefed him before the first one, told him he wouldn't need to speak, just be present, that his presence confirmed the marriage and the marriage confirmed her stability, that the board responded to optics the way markets responded to signals. He'd sat in a room full of people in expensive suits and watched her work, and it was one of the more genuinely impressive things he'd observed in his life. She was different in those rooms, not artificial, nothing about her felt false, but focused in a way that was almost architectural, like she'd identified every load-bearing point in a conversation before she walked in and knew exactly how much pressure each one could hold. She negotiated without raising her voice. She made decisions that affected hundreds of employees with the kind of calm that came not from indifference, but from enormous self-contained competence. Afterward, in the car, she'd asked him what he thought of the housing division budget proposal. "I thought the projections were low," he said. "The materials cost estimate for the Eastfield project doesn't account for the supply chain delays that hit us last quarter. Whoever built that model didn't talk to anyone on the ground." She'd looked at him. "No, they didn't." A pause. "I'll have Clara schedule a call with the site leads." "You don't have to do that. I'm aware." "I want to." She turned back to the window. "You see things differently than the people in that room. That's not an insult to them. It's just useful." He didn't know what to do with that, so he looked out his own window, and they rode the rest of the way home in a quiet that wasn't uncomfortable, and that was also something he hadn't fully accounted for. How easy the quiet was between them, how it didn't ask anything. The harder thing, the thing he turned over at night in the guest suite with its excellent mattress and its view of the ravine, was what to do with the fact that the easier everything got, the more complicated it felt underneath. He was not falling in love with her. He was clear about that. He was a practical man, and he knew the difference between proximity and feeling, between gratitude and something deeper. He'd been married before, really married, not like this, to Emma's mother, a woman named Rachel who had been funny and impulsive and genuinely good, and who had died in a car accident 4 days after Emma's second birthday, and the grief from that had taken years to find its shape. He was not the kind of man who confused new closeness with old loss, but he was noticing things. He was noticing the particular way she carried tiredness, not in her posture but in her eyes, a kind of flatness that appeared late in the evenings when the day had asked too much of her and she was conserving. He was noticing that she ate lunch at her desk every day because she didn't know how to stop moving long enough to sit down for a meal without it feeling like lost time. He was noticing that she laughed rarely, but genuinely, and that the sound of it seemed to surprise her slightly, like a muscle she'd forgotten she had. He noticed, and he filed it, and he told himself that noticing wasn't the same as anything else. He was moderately convincing. The trouble was that Olivia was also apparently noticing things. He caught her watching him with Emma sometimes, not in an intrusive way, but observational, like she was trying to understand how it worked, the specific grammar of how a parent moved through a child's world. One evening, he'd been helping Emma with a jigsaw puzzle on the living room floor, one of those impossible ones with 500 pieces, all the same shade of blue, and he'd looked up to find Olivia in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a glass of water, watching. "You can join us," he said. "I'm not good at puzzles." Nobody's good at puzzles. That's the whole point. She'd hesitated for just a moment, long enough that he thought she was going to decline, and then she'd sat down on the floor. Not gracefully, because floor sitting in work clothes is never graceful. She'd tucked her legs to one side and picked up a blue piece and turned it slowly in her hands, and Emma had immediately handed her 3 more and explained the system she'd developed for sorting by edge texture, and Olivia had listened with the full, undivided attention she brought to board meetings, and Nathan had looked away before his face did something he'd have to explain. They stayed on the floor for an hour. They didn't finish the puzzle. Emma fell asleep on the couch halfway through, one arm dangling toward the floor, and Nathan had carried her up to the oak tree room while Olivia stayed downstairs. When he came back, she was still there, sitting in the middle of a sea of blue puzzle pieces, looking at nothing in particular. "She trusts very easily," Olivia said, without looking up. "She does," he agreed. He sat back down across from her, because leaving felt wrong. "It worries me sometimes. It should, and it shouldn't." She picked up a puzzle piece, set it down in a slightly wrong spot. The capacity for trust is one of the rarest things a person can hold on to. Most people lose it by adulthood. "Did you?" A long pause. "I don't know," she said. "I think I learned to root around it, to get things done without needing to trust, because trusting people was slow and expensive." She paused again. "That sounds worse out loud than it does in my head." "It sounds honest," he said. "It sounds like an admission that I've been alone for a very long time and convinced myself it was a choice." The room was quiet. Nathan looked at her. Really looked, not the sideways looking he'd gotten used to, but directly. And she let him, which was itself something. Olivia Sterling did not typically let people look at her. "You didn't pick the wrong person for this," he said finally. She looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean whatever version of trust you decided to bet on when you picked me. You didn't bet wrong." He picked up a puzzle piece, found its mate, pressed them together. "For whatever that's worth." She was quiet for a moment. Something moved across her face, complicated, unresolved, genuine. "It's worth something," she said quietly. "More than I thought it would be." That night, Nathan lay in the guest suite and stared at the ceiling for a long time. He was not falling in love with her. He was just noticing more than he'd planned to. The distinction was becoming slightly harder to locate. The weeks turned, and with them came a rhythm that settled into something that would have looked, to anyone observing from the outside, like a family finding its footing. Emma started calling Olivia by her first name without the careful formality she'd used in the first weeks. "Olivia, can you help me? Olivia, look at this. Olivia, did you know that some dragons are actually just large lizards with delusions?" Olivia always answered. Always stopped whatever she was doing long enough to look at what Emma wanted her to look at, to engage with whatever Emma was presenting to the world. Nathan watched this happening and understood that it was both wonderful and complicated, because the contract had an end date, and his daughter did not understand that, and that was a problem he'd created knowingly and was going to have to solve eventually, and the solution was going to require an honesty he didn't fully have a script for yet. But that was future Nathan's problem. Present Nathan was learning to live inside the shape of something he hadn't built from scratch, and finding it fit in ways that unsettled him. The first real argument they had happened on a Wednesday in early December, and it was about nothing, which meant it was about everything. Nathan came home from the site at 6:30 to find the kitchen empty and the housekeeper, a quiet, efficient woman named Mrs. Paris, who managed the house with the invisible competence of someone who understood that her real job was to be unobtrusive. Informing him that Emma had a temperature and was upstairs, and that Miss Sterling had been on a call for the past 3 hours and hadn't been told. He took the stairs 2 at a time. Emma was in her bed, flushed and unhappy, clutching her stuffed elephant with the aggrieved expression of a child whose body has betrayed her social calendar. He took her temperature at 101.3, which was unpleasant but not alarming, found the children's fever reducer in the bathroom cabinet, got water and crackers, and sat on the edge of her bed while she dozed off. By the time he came downstairs, Olivia had emerged from her office. She was still in work mode, that particular frequency she ran on when she'd been on calls, slightly wired, slightly somewhere else, and she looked at him and immediately read something in his expression. What happened? Emma has a fever. He kept his voice level. She's okay. She's sleeping. But nobody told you. A slight shift in Olivia's posture. I was on calls. Mrs. Paris knows not to. I know she knows not to interrupt your calls, he said. That's fine for most things. But if my daughter is sick, I want you to know. Not because you're her mother. Not because of the arrangement. But because you're in this house and I'd like us to be... He stopped. Looked for the right word. I'd like us to be communicating about the things that matter. Olivia looked at him steadily. There was something in her face that was neither defensive nor apologetic, something more complicated, like she was recalibrating. You're right, she said. He'd been prepared for pushback. The lack of it left him a step behind. No, you're right. Clearly, without qualification. I have a habit of structuring my life so that the important things wait until I have space for them, and that's a system that works when I'm living alone. It doesn't work here. A short pause. I should have had Mrs. Paris interrupt the call. I should have checked in. I'm sorry. Nathan looked at her. In his experience, people who said I'm sorry quickly usually didn't mean it and were trying to end the conversation. Olivia said it like she meant it and was continuing the conversation. Okay, he said. How is she? Really? She'll be fine by Friday. It's just a winter bug. He leaned against the kitchen counter. She was asking for you, actually. Something moved across Olivia's face that she didn't have time to arrange into something more controlled. She was? She wanted to know if you'd read to her. I told her you were working. He watched her. You don't have to. I want to. She said it before she'd apparently fully processed the saying of it, and the slight surprise in her own expression confirmed that. I mean, if she's awake. She might be. Olivia set down the tablet she'd been carrying, pulled off the blazer she'd apparently still been wearing. She looked suddenly more like a person and less like a function, the slight undoing of all that professional architecture revealing something underneath that was softer and less sure of itself. Which book? She asked. Dragon Librarian, shelf by the window. She went upstairs. Nathan stood in the kitchen and listened to the house. He could hear, after a few minutes, the low murmur of Olivia's voice from upstairs, not the words, just the cadence, steady and unhurried, and at some point Emma's voice joining it, asking something, and Olivia's voice answering, and then quiet again as the story continued. He made tea he didn't particularly want, and stood at the kitchen window looking at the dark shape of the oak trees against the December sky, and understood that he was in some kind of trouble. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that announces itself, the quiet kind, that just sits there and gets more real the longer you don't look at it. He was not falling in love with her. He was lying to himself. He'd been lying to himself for about 3 weeks, and he'd been relatively comfortable with the lie because the lie was easier than the truth. And the truth was that this woman, this complicated, controlled, lonely woman who left coffee ready and sat on floors and read to his sick daughter without being asked, was taking up significantly more space in his chest than he had allocated for her. He poured the tea down the drain and went to bed. Upstairs, the murmur of the dragon book continued, and then stopped. And then he heard Olivia's footsteps in the hallway, quiet and careful, the footsteps of someone leaving a room where a child is sleeping. And he lay in the dark listening to them pass his door and continue down the hall to her own room. And then the house was quiet. He was a practical man. He would sort this out. He always sorted things out. He stared at the ceiling for 45 minutes and did not sort anything out. December moved fast, the way December does when you're busy and not paying attention. There were 2 more board appearances, a holiday charity event where Nathan wore the dark suit again, and Olivia wore something winter-appropriate and devastating that he looked at once and then carefully stopped looking at, and a company dinner where Gerald Sterling was present for the first time. Nathan had known Gerald Sterling was a problem. Olivia had told him as much, but knowing and seeing were different. Gerald was 61, silver-haired, possessed of the kind of physical bulk that in younger years might have been athletic and had now settled into something more authoritative and less mobile. He had a handshake like a structural test and eyes that moved over a room the way a foreman's eyes move over a construction site. evaluating, cataloging, making quiet assessments about which pieces were load-bearing and which could be removed. When he was introduced to Nathan, he smiled with all his teeth. "Nathan Reed," he said the name like he was trying it on for size. "I've heard so much about you." "Good things, I hope," Nathan said, which was the expected social response, meaningless and smooth. "Interesting things," Gerald said. "My niece keeps interesting company." He glanced at Olivia, who was standing beside Nathan, and the glance had nothing warm in it. "She always has." "Gerald." Olivia's voice was perfectly measured, neutral in the way of someone who has spent years making neutrality a weapon. "I didn't realize you'd be here tonight." "I'm a board member, sweetheart. I go where the board goes." He smiled again. "Your husband seems like a solid man." "What is it you do, Nathan?" "Construction management." Gerald nodded slowly, and the carried more information than the nod. "Well, that's something, isn't it?" It was the kind of dismissal that was designed to be impossible to address directly. Too light on the surface, too loaded underneath. Nathan had spent his career dealing with a version of this from every direction, and he recognized it the way he recognized a hairline crack in a concrete wall, invisible to the casual eye, load-bearing in its implications. "It's a living," Nathan said pleasantly. "Keeps me honest." Gerald's eyes moved to him with new attention. He'd expected something more defensive, Nathan guessed, something he could grip. "I'm sure it does," Gerald said, and the smile this time was different, sharper, the smile of a man recalibrating. Later, in the car, Olivia was quiet for the first 10 minutes. Then she said, without preamble, "He's already suspicious." "I know. He was watching us all evening." "I know that too." Nathan looked out the window. "He's not watching because he thinks we're fraudulent. He's watching because he doesn't understand us. We don't fit the pattern of what he expected." "What did he expect?" "Either a trophy husband who follows your lead completely and looks decorative, or a man who's obviously in over his head. I'm neither. That bothers him." He paused. "He'll start digging." Olivia was quiet for a moment. "He has resources, investigators. He's used them before. Then he'll find what we've given him to find. The marriage is legal, the paperwork is airtight, the timeline is plausible." He turned to look at her. "Is there anything in the original arrangement, any document, any communication, that could be read as transactional?" She thought about it, honestly, which he appreciated. "The initial framework document I gave you at the site, there's a version of it on my personal server. Encrypted? Heavily, but not unbreakable if someone is determined and well-funded." "All right," he said. He thought about it for a moment. "We don't change anything. We don't run. If he finds that document, we deal with it when it happens. The best defense we have is that everything in our daily life looks like a real marriage. Because it..." He stopped. "Because it increasingly is," he did not say. "Because our story is consistent," he finished instead. "That's the most important thing." Olivia was looking at him. He could feel it without turning. "You're good at this," she said. "I'm good at assessing what might fall apart and reinforcing the weak points before it does. It's the same skill, different application." She made a small sound that might have been a laugh. "You make marriage sound like structural engineering." "All relationships are structural engineering," he said. "You build something. You figure out where the stress points are. You reinforce them, or they fail." "And ours?" He thought about the coffee machine and the floor puzzle, and the way she'd said, "I'm sorry," like she meant it, and the sound of her voice reading a dragon book to his sick daughter in the dark. "Ours has better bones than I expected," he said. She didn't respond to that. But when he glanced over, she was looking out her window at the passing city, and the expression on her face was one he'd started to recognize, the quiet, slightly unguarded one. The one that meant she was feeling something she hadn't scheduled. The Christmas holiday arrived with the particular chaos of a 6-year-old who had been asking pointed questions about gift logistics since October. Emma had presented Nathan with a handwritten list in early December that included, in addition to several books and a specific type of art set, a dog, listed third and underlined twice. Nathan had found this on the kitchen counter one morning and looked at it for a long moment. When he turned around, Olivia was reading it over his shoulder. "She's persistent," Olivia said. "She's her mother's daughter," he said, and immediately regretted it. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was the kind of true thing that opened a door he hadn't meant to open in front of Olivia. But Olivia only said quietly, "She must have been remarkable." "She was," Nathan said. Just that. Just those two words. And Olivia didn't push, didn't try to fill the space or round the moment off into something easier, and that somehow was the most considerate thing she could have done. They spent Christmas Eve in the house with Diane, who arrived with a casserole, and the particular sharpness of an older sister who had been briefed on the arrangement but was now operating with her own eyes and drawing her own conclusions. She watched Olivia and Nathan with the calm, relentless attention of someone conducting a very patient audit, and at some point in the evening, when Nathan was in the kitchen and Emma was monopolizing Olivia on the couch with a new book, Diane appeared beside him at the counter. "She's not what I pictured," Diane said. "What did you picture?" "I don't know. Someone who treated you more like furniture." She watched Olivia across the room, who was reading aloud with Emma, who had one hand on Olivia's arm and was clearly already half asleep. "She's careful with her. Your daughter." "She is." Diane looked at him sideways. "And you're completely fine." "I'm completely fine." "You're making that face." "I don't have a face." "You have your Rachel face," Diane said quietly, not unkindly. "Except it's not Rachel, which means something different is happening." He was quiet for a moment. The casserole smelled like home, garlic and butter, and the kind of warmth that has nothing to do with temperature. "Diane, I'm not saying anything. I'm just observing." She picked up her fork. "I'm just saying that if something real is happening in there, it's not wrong. It's not a problem to be managed. It's just something real. It complicates things. Most real things do." She bumped his shoulder with hers. "That's how you know they're real." Across the room, Emma had fallen asleep against Olivia's shoulder. Olivia had stopped reading and was sitting very still, the book closed in her lap, not moving because Emma was there and she didn't want to disturb her. She was looking down at Emma's face with an expression that contained no calculation, no management, no professional composure. Just a woman, unexpectedly holding something she hadn't known she needed. Nathan stood in the kitchen doorway and watched this, and stopped lying to himself. He was falling in love with her. He had probably been falling for weeks, in the slow, structural way that buildings settle. Not dramatically, not all at once, but incrementally. Each small moment adding its weight until the foundation had shifted so far from the original plan that the original plan was no longer the relevant document. He didn't know what to do with it. The contract said 1 year. The contract said clean exit. The contract said no feelings, no complications, no crossed lines. The contract had been written by people who thought you could live alongside someone, really live, in the daily ordinary depth of it, and stay exactly where you started. Those people had been wrong. He went and sat down in the chair across from them, and Emma stirred in her sleep, and Olivia looked up and found his eyes, and something passed between them that neither of them named. The fire in the fireplace made the room amber and warm, and Diane was clattering quietly in the kitchen, and outside the December wind moved through the oak trees, and Nathan sat in the middle of all of it and understood that he was in far deeper than any contract had prepared him for. He just didn't know yet whether Olivia Sterling was in the same water. And asking felt right then like too much weight to put on a moment that was, at least, exactly what it appeared to be. Real. Whatever else it was or wasn't, it was real. And for now, in the amber quiet of that December evening, that had to be enough. January arrived cold and without ceremony, and with it came the particular kind of tension that settles into a house when everyone inside it is carrying something they haven't said out loud yet. Nathan had made a decision, quietly and without announcement, somewhere between Christmas Eve and New Year's Day. The decision was this: he was going to do nothing about what he felt. Not yet. Maybe not ever, depending on how the year played out. Because what he felt was his own business, and acting on it, saying it, showing it in any way that broke the careful architecture of what they'd built, risked the one thing he wasn't willing to risk: Emma's stability, Olivia's company, the thousands of families whose housing projects were still standing because Olivia was still standing. He was a man who understood load-bearing structures. He understood that you didn't knock out a wall just because you'd developed an opinion about it. So he carried it, quietly, the way he'd carried most hard things in his life, not by pretending they weren't there, but by refusing to let them steer. Olivia, for her part, seemed to have made a similar decision, though he couldn't be certain. She was warmer than she'd been in October, less formally arranged around him, quicker to laugh, more willing to sit in the kitchen at 9 p.m. with a cup of tea and talk about nothing in particular, which was something she'd initially been incapable of and was now apparently developing a tolerance for. But she also kept a certain distance that he recognized not as coldness, but as deliberateness. She was a woman who did nothing accidentally. If there was space between them, she'd chosen it. He respected that. It didn't make it easier, but he respected it. The first sign that January was going to be ugly came on a Thursday, 2 weeks into the new year, when Clara knocked on Olivia's office door at 8 in the morning with the expression of someone delivering bad news they'd been sitting on for exactly as long as they could manage. Nathan was in the kitchen when he heard the knock from down the hall, heard Clara's voice, heard the register of Olivia's response shift from her morning tone into something sharper and more contained. He poured his second cup of coffee and waited, because he'd learned that Olivia processed operational problems the way he processed structural ones. She needed a moment to assess before she talked about it, and interrupting that moment was counterproductive. She appeared in the kitchen doorway 6 minutes later. She was already fully composed, which meant whatever it was had been significant enough to require it. Gerald's retained a private investigation firm, she said. Apparently he started in December. Clara just got confirmation from a source on the board. Nathan set down his cup. What kind of firm? The kind that finds things. She came into the kitchen, poured coffee she probably didn't need, stood at the counter with both hands wrapped around the mug. They've been pulling our timeline, employment records, marriage certificate, public appearances, looking for gaps or inconsistencies. And so far there are none, because there aren't any. She looked at him. The marriage is real. The paperwork is correct. Our public presence has been consistent. But Gerald has more money than patience, and if the investigators can't find inconsistencies in what's visible, they'll look harder at what isn't. She paused. The document on my private server. I've moved it to an encrypted external drive and removed the server copy. That's handled. Good. He thought about it. What does your attorney say? That we're legally sound and should stay the course. A slight pause. He also said, somewhat diplomatically, that our best protection is visible authenticity, which is what we've been doing. Then we keep doing it. She nodded, but there was something in her face that wasn't resolved, a residue of something she hadn't finished saying. He waited. He's not just looking for legal vulnerabilities, she said finally. Gerald has never been purely strategic. He's vindictive. If he finds something, anything, he'll use it publicly. Not just to make a legal case, to make a spectacle. She looked down at her coffee. He did it to my father years ago, found a financial irregularity from a decade prior, something minor, something that was already resolved, and leaked it to the press in a way that was timed for maximum damage. My father never fully recovered his reputation. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Did you tell me this when we started the arrangement? No? Why not? Because I didn't think he'd move this fast, she said, and because I didn't want you to say no. There it was, honest and slightly uncomfortable, the way her honesty usually was. Okay, he said. She looked at him. Okay? Okay. He's vindictive and he moves fast and we adjust for that. I'm not going anywhere because the problem is bigger than I was told. That's not how I work. He picked up his coffee. But don't do that again. Don't manage what I know to manage what I decide. Tell me everything. She held his gaze for a moment. Something in it was very direct. The look of a woman who had spent most of her professional life in rooms where information was currency and giving it away was a vulnerability, being asked to simply hand it over on the basis of trust. Everything, she said. Yes. All right. Good. He rinsed his cup in the sink. I have to be at the site by 7. We'll talk more tonight. He left, and Olivia stood in the kitchen in the early January gray, and somewhere under her composure, in the part of her she'd learned to keep very quiet, something shifted a fraction of an inch. The investigators surfaced again 2 weeks later in a way that was more personal. Nathan was at the Ridgemont site when Dale came to find him with the look on his face that Nathan had seen before. The look of someone delivering information they're not sure how to categorize. There was a guy here this morning, Dale said. Before you arrived, asking questions. Nathan looked up from the blueprints. What kind of questions? About you, your work history, how long you've been on this project, whether you seemed like a different person recently, whether anyone had noticed changes in your behavior or your spending. Dale paused. He had credentials from something called Meridian Consulting Group. Nathan rolled the blueprints. What did you tell him? I told him to get off my site, Dale said with some satisfaction. Then I told the crew the same, but a couple of them talked to him before I got there. He looked at Nathan. I don't know what they said. I don't think it was anything bad. Your crew likes you, Nathan. You know that. But I thought you should know. You did the right thing. He looked at the rolled blueprints in his hands. If he comes back, same answer. This is private property, and he needs to leave. You in some kind of trouble? Not the kind you're thinking, he said. It's a family situation. It'll resolve. Dale looked at him for a moment with the specific skepticism of a man who has worked construction for 20 years and knows the difference between it'll resolve and I hope it resolves. All right, Dale said. And that was that, because Dale was, at his core, a good man who understood when not to press. Nathan drove home that evening with his jaw tighter than usual, and when he walked into the house, Olivia was in the study with her attorney, a lean, precise man named Warren Cole, and they both looked up with the shared expression of people who had been waiting. They've been to my site, Nathan said, before either of them could speak. Warren Cole opened his folder. Meridian Consulting Group. Gerald retained them November 28th. They specialize in due diligence for corporate disputes, also, colloquially, in finding pressure points, and he looked at Nathan directly. They've been to your former residence. They spoke to your landlord. They've been to Emma's previous school. Nathan went very still. Her school. They asked about enrollment dates, home situation, whether there had been any changes in her family circumstance prior to this past October. Warren paused. The school didn't tell them anything they're legally not permitted to, but the fact that they asked tells us something about the direction Gerald is building his case. He's trying to establish that Emma was used as leverage, Olivia said. She was sitting behind the desk, and her face was controlled, but her hands, Nathan noticed, were not entirely still. That you agreed to the arrangement because of what it would provide for her, which would support an argument that the marriage was transactional. Which it was, Nathan said flatly, at the start. At the start, Warren agreed carefully. The question is whether a marriage that began as an arrangement but has been conducted as a genuine partnership over 4 months constitutes fraud under the trust terms. My reading is no. The clause only requires that you be married. It doesn't specify the emotional conditions of the marriage. Gerald's reading may differ, Olivia said. Gerald can read it however he likes. The legal standard is what matters. Warren closed the folder. My advice is the same as before. Stay the course. Be visible. Be consistent. And do not, under any circumstances, allow anyone to document or record anything that could be read as a performance of the relationship rather than the relationship itself. He left at 9:30, and Nathan and Olivia were alone in the study with the particular heaviness of a conversation that had ended and left too much still sitting in the room. Emma, Nathan said. I know. If he goes anywhere near her directly, he won't, Olivia said, with a certainty that was part assurance and part warning. I will end anything he attempts to involve her in before it gets a foot off the ground. That is not a negotiable space. She looked at him. She is not part of this. She has never been part of this. She's 6 years old and she's asleep upstairs thinking this is her home, he said. His voice came out with more roughness than he'd meant. She's attached to you. She talks about you at school. Her teacher told me she introduced you as her... He stopped. Olivia was very still. As her what? He looked at the window. As her mom. He said it quietly. Her new mom. That's what she told her class. The silence that followed was long enough to have a shape. Olivia sat with it for a moment that Nathan couldn't read, couldn't tell if she was moved or frightened or both, which were not always separate things, and with Olivia they very rarely were. Her face did something complicated and unscripted. I didn't know that, she said. Her voice was careful in the way of someone being careful not to break something. She didn't tell me either. Her teacher mentioned it. He finally looked at her. I'm not telling you this to pressure you. I'm telling you because you told me to tell you everything. And because, he exhaled, because whatever we navigate with Gerald, whatever the outcome of the contract year, the part about my daughter is real. That's not something that ends on a schedule. Olivia looked at him for a long, unguarded moment. I know, she said. And then, very quietly, as if she was saying it to herself as much as to him. I know. They didn't talk about it further that night. Some things needed to be said and then left alone to settle, like concrete that had to cure before you could build on it. Nathan understood that. He thought, maybe Olivia was learning it. The bribe came in February. It arrived not dramatically, not in a manila envelope or a clandestine meeting in a parking garage, but in a phone call Nathan received on a Tuesday afternoon while he was reviewing load calculations in the site trailer. The number was unfamiliar. He answered because unfamiliar numbers occasionally meant suppliers or city inspectors, and both required immediate attention. Mr. Reed. The voice was male, professional, the particular smoothness of someone accustomed to having difficult conversations without inflection. My name is Douglas Farr. I represent certain interested parties in the matter of Sterling Development Group. Nathan looked at the load calculations in front of him. I'm listening. My clients have become aware of the circumstances surrounding your marriage to Olivia Sterling, Douglas Farr said, without preamble. I want to be direct with you. This call is not a threat. It's an opportunity. Keep going. My clients are prepared to offer you a settlement of $450,000, payable in full within 72 hours of signing, in exchange for a sworn statement confirming that the marriage was entered into as a contractual arrangement and is not a genuine partnership. A pause. In practical terms, this means you sign a document. You receive a significant sum that improves your life considerably, and this matter is resolved without further complication to you or your daughter. Nathan was quiet for a moment. My daughter, he said. Yes. My clients understand she's young and that stability is important. This sum would ensure that stability without... Don't, Nathan said. His voice came out flat and cold. Don't use my daughter as a selling point for a bribe. That's the last time you mention her. A brief pause on the other end. Understood. The offer stands regardless. Nathan looked at the load calculations. He thought about the kind of man who authorized this call, who sat in some office somewhere and decided that $450,000 was a reasonable price for a 6-year-old's stability and used it as leverage, and found nothing wrong with any part of that. Tell your client, Nathan said, that the answer is no. That the answer was no before you finished your first sentence. And tell him that this call happened, and that I know it happened, and that he should account for that in whatever he's planning next. He hung up. He sat in the trailer for about 30 seconds, looking at nothing. Then he picked the phone back up and called Olivia. She answered on the second ring. I need you to listen to something, he said, and told her everything. Not edited, not softened, not managed for her benefit. All of it, including the part about Emma, especially the part about Emma, because she'd asked him to tell her everything and he intended to. She was quiet for the duration of it. When he finished, the silence stretched for long enough that he checked the call was still connected. 450,000, she said finally. Her voice was very even. Yes. That's more than I estimated he'd offer. Another pause. He must be more concerned about the timeline than I thought. Olivia. He waited until he was sure she was listening. I turned it down. I want to be clear about that in case you have any... I know you turned it down, she said. You called me 30 seconds after it ended. You didn't have to call me at all. You could have said nothing and I'd never have known. The fact that you're calling me right now is the answer. He hadn't thought about it that way. I'm calling because we agreed to tell each other everything. You're also calling, she said carefully, because you wanted me to know, not just as a matter of protocol. He didn't argue with that. What do we do? He said instead. We document it. Warren needs to know immediately. This is potentially evidence of bad faith conduct on Gerald's part, which changes the legal landscape considerably. If Gerald is willing to attempt to bribe my husband into perjury, a judge will find that relevant. A pause. And Nathan, thank you. Don't thank me for not selling you out. I'm not thanking you for that. Her voice shifted to something quieter. I'm thanking you for calling, for choosing to tell me, for... She stopped. He heard something in that stop that she probably didn't intend to let through. For being the person I thought you were when I sat down in that trailer. He didn't know what to say to that. He looked at the load calculations and thought that he'd built things for most of his adult life and that none of it had prepared him for the weight of being someone's reason to believe people could be trusted. "Let's get Warren on the phone," he said, because it was the practical thing, and practical was what he had. "Yes, I'll call him now." "Olivia." "Yes. He's going to escalate after this." "I know. He expected me to take it. He thought I would." He paused. "He's going to be angry about being wrong, and angry men with resources are dangerous." "I know that too." A beat. "I've known Gerald my entire life. I know exactly what he's capable of." Her voice was steady, but underneath the steadiness was something that had been there since the beginning. A kind of bone-deep tiredness that came from a decade of fighting the same war in the same boardrooms against the same man. "What I didn't know," she added quietly, "was that I'd have someone in my corner when it came to the worst of it." He held the phone and didn't say anything for a moment, because anything he said would have been either too much or not enough. "I'll be home by 6, he said finally. "I'll have dinner ready." "You don't cook." "Mrs. Paris will have dinner ready. I'll be present for it." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Good enough." The next 3 weeks were tense in the specific way of a storm that's been located on the radar but hasn't arrived yet. Warren Cole filed a formal complaint with Gerald's attorneys documenting the bribe attempt. Gerald's attorneys responded with a letter of studied innocence, suggesting that any communication from Mr. Farr was unsanctioned and unofficial, which was transparently false, and which Warren filed along with everything else. The board was quietly made aware that there appeared to be irregularities in Gerald's conduct. The board did what boards do with uncomfortable information. They noted it, retained it, and waited to see which direction the wind was going to blow before committing to a position. Gerald, meanwhile, stopped being invisible. He began appearing at functions they attended. Not confrontationally, he was too experienced for blunt instruments, but presently. Positioned at the edge of rooms in conversations adjacent to theirs, close enough to observe and be observed. Nathan began to notice the pattern by the third event and named it to Olivia on the ride home. "He's building a record," Nathan said. "He wants to be documented as being present, as a concerned party, before he makes his move. So when he does, he can say he tried to address it personally and privately." "You understand him very quickly," Olivia said. She was looking at him in the dark of the car with the particular focused attention she brought to things she found genuinely interesting. "He's a man who's trying to make something fall down," Nathan said. "I spend most of my professional life on the other side of that. In the house, things were both easier and harder. Easier because they'd long since dropped the careful formality of the early weeks. They moved through the shared space with the relaxed familiarity of people who had accumulated months of small, ordinary moments, who knew each other's habits and tolerances, and the particular brand of silence each one needed at different times. Harder because knowing someone well and wanting something from them were not separate experiences, and Nathan was carrying something he'd decided not to say, and the not saying of it was work. There was a night in the middle of February, a Thursday, unremarkable on its surface, when Olivia came downstairs at 11 p.m. while Nathan was still in the kitchen with a set of building plans spread across the table. She was in a robe, her hair loose, the composed professional architecture entirely absent in the way it was only absent very late at night when she'd stopped maintaining it. She looked, in those moments, not younger exactly, but realer, less edited. "You're still up," she said. "Eastfield revised the foundation specs. I need to review before the morning meeting." He looked at her. "You should be asleep." "I couldn't." She moved to the counter, filled a glass of water, stood there drinking it with the slow intentionality of someone who came downstairs for water and is now using the water as an excuse to be somewhere she wanted to be. "Can I look?" "At foundation specs? At what you're doing?" She sat down across from him, pulled the nearest blueprint toward her, looked at it with the same attention she brought to balance sheets and regulatory filings. "Here," she pointed to a notated section. "This load calculation. Someone's underestimated the soil compression rate for that lot. I had a report on that site from a geological survey last year. The ground composition is more variable than standard models account for." Nathan looked at where she was pointing, looked at the numbers. felt the small, distinct click of something fitting that hadn't been fitting. "You read geological surveys," he said. "I own the land," she said simply. "I try to know what I'm working with." He studied the section. She was right. The compression estimate was off. The revision she was pointing at would require a deeper pour and additional reinforcement, which meant cost adjustments and a schedule conversation. But getting it right now was significantly preferable to discovering it later. "How long have you been carrying that survey data in your head?" he asked. "I don't know. I remember things that matter." She paused. "Land is the thing that doesn't depreciate if you understand it. My grandmother taught me that." He looked at her across the blueprint, across the spread of lines and numbers that represented a building that hadn't been built yet. And he thought that there was something almost unbearably specific about this woman. The way she contained things, the geological survey, the way she'd sat on the floor for a jigsaw puzzle, the coffee machine, ready every morning, the way she'd gone still when he told her what Emma had called her at school. "Your grandmother was the last person who didn't make you feel like you had to perform for them," he said. She looked up from the blueprint. It wasn't a question, and she received it as a statement, which meant she recognized it as true. "Yes," she said. "How did you talk about her the same way I talk about building things I'm proud of, like it's something solid you can point to." He smoothed the edge of the blueprint. "Who else did you have?" "My parents were present," she said. "They were not absent people. They were just occupied. Running something large leaves gaps." She paused. "I had Margaret. I had this company, eventually. I had the work." "That's not enough." "No," she agreed. "It turns out it isn't." She looked back at the blueprint, and when she spoke again, her voice was quiet in the way of something being said carefully, with full awareness of what it might mean. "I didn't know how much I was missing until there were people in this house." He didn't move. He was very aware of the table between them, and the blueprints, and the late hour, and her hair loose around her face, and the terrible clarity of what he wanted to say. He didn't say it. Not yet. Not tonight. Not while Gerald was circling and the contract was still running, and the right moment would require more stability than a Thursday night in February with foundation specs between them. But he stopped looking away from it. "There's enough space in this house for more people," he said. Carefully, low. Not pushing, not naming, just placing something in the room where she could see it. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her face that was honest and unedited and slightly afraid, the way things that matter are always slightly afraid. "I know," she said, softly. The same two words she'd said about Emma, but different now. Weighted differently, pointed somewhere new. The kitchen was quiet around them. The blueprints lay between them like a map of something that hadn't been fully built yet. He wasn't going to say it tonight, but she knew. And he knew she knew. And that was enough to hold for now. Enough to carry through the week and the coming weeks and whatever Gerald had been quietly building in the dark, while they'd been building something else entirely, right here in the lit kitchen of a house that had somehow, without either of them fully authorizing it, become a home. The storm was coming. They both understood that. But on a Thursday night in February, with foundation specs and loose hair and the specific honesty of two people who had stopped lying to themselves, it was quiet enough that the coming weather was, for once, the least important thing in the room. The call came on a Monday morning in March, and it came from Warren Cole, which meant it was not good news delivered at a convenient time. Nathan was on the highway, 20 minutes from the Ridgemont site, when his phone connected through the truck's speakers, and Warren's voice filled the cab with the particular controlled urgency of an attorney who has learned to deliver bad news without inflection because inflection costs billable hours. "Gerald's moving," Warren said. "He's called an emergency board meeting for this Thursday. I received the filing 30 minutes ago." Nathan changed lanes without hurrying. "On what grounds?" "He's citing a fiduciary concern regarding the validity of the trust clause conditions. He's claiming he has evidence that the marriage was entered into as a contractual arrangement and does not meet the standard of a genuine partnership as implied by the trust's intent." A pause. "He's bringing attorneys. He's also, and this is the part I want you to be prepared for, he's invited 3 journalists. He intends to make this public." "He wants an audience," Nathan said. "He wants a spectacle. He He wants to do this in front of the board, the press, and as many witnesses as possible so that even if he loses the legal argument, the story is already out there. Reputational damage as a secondary strategy. Warren paused. Olivia is already aware. I called her first. She asked me to call you. Nathan thought about that for a moment. The fact that she'd asked Warren to call him rather than calling herself, which was not coldness, but the opposite of it. She was managing herself right now, giving herself the minutes between Warren's call and Nathan's to build whatever she needed to build before she had to hold it in front of him. What do we need? He said. You need to be in that room Thursday. You need to be present, composed, and you need to be prepared for Gerald to say things about your marriage that are designed to provoke a reaction. He'll try to make you look like exactly what he's claiming you are, a man who's been paid to perform. If you react with anger or defensiveness, it confirms the performance theory. If you're steady, it doesn't. I'll be steady. There's one more thing. Warren's voice shifted slightly. The bribe. The February phone call. I've been building a case around that documentation, and I believe Thursday is the moment to deploy it. But I want to discuss the approach with both of you before I do. There's a version of this where we use it proactively, and a version where we wait for Gerald to overextend and then use it as a counter. The timing matters. I'll be home by 4, Nathan said. We'll sit down together. He arrived to find Olivia in the kitchen, not behind her desk, not in the study with lawyers, but in the kitchen, which he'd learned was where she went when she needed to think without the apparatus of her professional life around her. She was at the island with a cup of coffee and a legal pad covered in handwriting, and she looked up when he came in, and her face was the face he'd been watching for 7 months now, composed on the surface and considerably more complicated underneath, and he knew how to read it in a way he hadn't known in October. Warren called me, he said. I know. I asked him to. She set down her pen. I needed 10 minutes before I could talk about it. I figured. He sat down across from her. Talk me through what you're thinking. She looked at the legal pad. Gerald has one play, and he's making it Thursday. He doesn't have the legal argument. Warren is right about that. The trust clause is clear, but he doesn't need to win legally. He needs to make enough noise that the board gets nervous, that the press runs a story about the validity of the marriage, that my credibility takes enough damage to erode my position, regardless of what a judge eventually says. She paused. He's betting that I'll try to defend myself quietly, the way I always have, the way I've handled him for 10 years. Keep it internal, manage the narrative, don't give it oxygen. And instead we walk into that room and we don't manage anything. She looked up at him. We let it be exactly what it is. He thought about that. Which is what, in your view? A marriage that started as a legal arrangement and became something real. She said it without breaking his gaze, direct and exact the way she always was when she'd decided to stop hedging. That's the truth. We don't dress it up, we don't deflect, we don't perform. If Gerald wants to argue that it began as a contract, he's right. It did. But a contract and a marriage aren't mutually exclusive, and the person who can speak to what it became is not Gerald Sterling. It's us. Nathan was quiet for a moment. He was aware of what she'd said, of the something real in the us, and the way she'd looked at him when she said them, and he held all of it carefully, the way you hold something you don't want to drop. And the bribe, he said, Warren uses it, not defensively, offensively. We let Gerald make his case. We let him lay out his evidence. We let the room believe for approximately 60 seconds that he has us, and then Warren puts the documentation on the table. She paused. Gerald offered to pay my husband to betray me. That's not a legal footnote. That's a character statement. He'll deny it. He'll try. But we have the call log, the recording. Warren confirmed the documentation is solid, and we have the follow-up letter from Farr's firm, which Gerald's attorneys have tried to distance themselves from, and which has left a paper trail in the distancing. She closed the legal pad. When someone tries that hard to say something didn't happen, it usually did. Nathan looked at her. He thought about the woman who had walked into a construction trailer in October with a cream-colored document and terrible judgment about coffee temperature, and the woman sitting across from him now, and the distance between those two wasn't in time. It was in something else, something neither of them had budgeted for. You're not afraid, he said. I'm terrified, she said matter-of-factly. But I've been afraid of Gerald my whole life. and it hasn't changed anything about what he is or what he's going to do. So, she picked up her coffee. I'd rather be terrified and present than calm and losing. He smiled at that. A real one, not the polite workplace version. She caught it, and something in her face eased slightly, the way a room gets easier when someone opens a window. Okay, he said. Thursday. We go in together. Together, she agreed. They spent Tuesday and Wednesday with Warren, who was the most thorough man Nathan had ever met in a professional context, and who prepared for every contingency with the systematic completeness of someone who had once been surprised in a courtroom and had decided it would not happen twice. He walked them through Gerald's likely arguments, through the documentation they'd deploy in response, through the sequence of the meeting and the optimal moment for each piece of evidence. He also, at one point, looked at Nathan over his legal pad and said, with the careful directness of a man who chooses his moments, "You understand that you'll be asked, in that room, to speak to the nature of your marriage, not legally, personally." I understand, Nathan said. And you're prepared to do that? Yes. Warren held his gaze for a moment, apparently satisfied with what he found there, and moved on to the next item. Olivia had been looking at her own notes and didn't look up, but Nathan noticed the slight change in her posture, a settling, not tension, and filed it without comment. Emma knew something was happening because Emma always knew when the adults around her were carrying something heavy, even when they were carrying it carefully. On Wednesday evening, she came to find Nathan in the study where he was reviewing documents, climbed onto the chair beside him without asking, and sat there doing her homework in silence for 20 minutes before saying, with the conversational casualness of someone who had been thinking about a thing for a while, "Is everything going to be okay?" Nathan looked at her. She was 7 now. Her birthday had been in January, a small party with Diane and 2 school friends and a cake that Olivia had ordered from a bakery across town and had apparently researched with the same thoroughness she brought to geological surveys. She looked in that moment exactly like her mother, in the specific way that hit Nathan sometimes without warning. The set of her eyes, the small, serious line of her mouth when she was asking something real. "Yeah, Bug," he said. "It's going to be okay." "Is it the man with the silver hair?" Nathan looked at her. "What do you know about the man with the silver hair?" "I heard Mrs. Parris talking on the phone." She was very focused on her worksheet. "She said he was causing trouble. She said some people just like to make problems." Emma paused. "I think that's true. There's a boy at school like that." "What do you do about the boy at school?" "I ignore him mostly, but when he does something that actually matters, I tell the teacher." She looked up. "Is that what you're doing? Telling the teacher?" "Something like that," he said. "Yeah." She seemed satisfied with this. She went back to her worksheet. After a moment, she said, without looking up, "Olivia was nervous today. She got very quiet. She's dealing with something hard. I gave her my lucky eraser." Emma said it simply, like this was an obvious and sufficient response to the situation. "The one with the star on it. I said she could use it until things were better." Nathan looked at his daughter for a long moment, at this small person who had arrived in his life, and immediately started rearranging his entire understanding of what mattered, and felt the particular fullness that came with moments like this. Not joy exactly, too complicated for that, but something deep and structural, like weight-bearing love. "That was kind of you," he said. She said thank you, and she held it for a little bit. Emma turned a page. "I think it helped." He thought about Olivia, sitting somewhere in this house, holding a child's lucky eraser with a star on it, and he looked at his documents and couldn't read a single word on them. Thursday came with gray March skies and the particular flat light of a morning that wasn't going to improve. The Sterling Development boardroom was on the 14th floor of the main tower, a room Nathan had been in 4 times before, always as a spouse in the peripheral seat, observing. It had a long table that seated 20 floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Hargrove, and the specific airless quality of rooms where serious money made serious decisions. It smelled like expensive carpet and recycled air, and the ambient anxiety of everyone who had ever sat in it and known that something significant was about to happen. Gerald had arrived early. Nathan registered this as they walked in. Gerald already seated at the far end of the table, silver-haired and broad-shouldered, flanked by 2 attorneys and a man Nathan didn't recognize who had the look of a professional consultant. 3 journalists were positioned along the side wall with notepads and the carefully neutral expressions of people who had been told they could observe but not participate, and who intended to make good use of both conditions. The board members filed in over the next 10 minutes, 12 of them, with a range of expressions that told Nathan they had all been briefed in advance and were not uniformly happy about being here. Some of them looked at Gerald with the careful neutrality of people withholding judgment. Some looked at Olivia with what might have been sympathy or might have been assessment. A few looked at Nathan with the frank curiosity of people trying to place him in a frame they hadn't been given. Warren Cole sat to Nathan's right with a leather case on the table in front of him, closed, unhurried. The board chair, a trim woman in her 60s named Patricia Hess, who Nathan had met twice, and who had the manner of someone who had sat through a great many difficult meetings and measured them all by how efficiently they resolved, opened the proceedings with the economical precision of someone who did not intend to allow this to run long. "Gerald," she said, "you called this meeting. The floor is yours." Gerald stood. He was, Nathan had to acknowledge, an effective presence in a room. He moved with the confidence of someone who had been performing authority for decades, not loud, not theatrical, but weighted, like he occupied more space than his body required. "Thank you, Patricia." He looked around the table with the calm benevolence of a man who believes he is about to win. "I want to be clear that what I'm presenting today comes from a place of genuine concern for this company, for its integrity, and for the terms that govern our family trust." He paused. "I have reason to believe, supported by documented evidence, that the marriage of Olivia Sterling and Nathan Reed does not meet the conditions of authenticity required by the terms of our grandmother's trust, and that Olivia's continued control of the voting shares is therefore not legally supported." He sat down. One of his attorneys opened a folder and began distributing documents around the table. Copies of what appeared to be a timeline, financial records, and a summary document whose cover page Nathan could see from his seat. Gerald's attorney, a younger man with the aggressive precision of someone trying to build a reputation, stood and walked them through the case methodically. The timeline of the marriage, the speed of it, 11 days from first apparent contact to the civil ceremony. Financial records indicating a transfer of funds into a trust account that, their analysis suggested, corresponded to the compensation arrangement. Communications pulled from the preliminary framework document, the one Olivia had moved to the encrypted external drive, but apparently not before a partial version had been captured somewhere in the chain, that contained language strongly suggesting a contractual basis for the marriage. The room was very quiet. Nathan looked at the journalists. They were writing. He looked at the board members. Several of them were reading the distributed documents with the careful expressions of people who were finding them troubling. He looked at Olivia. She was sitting with her hands flat on the table and her face composed and entirely still, and he could see, because he knew what to look for now, the fine tension in her jaw and the quality of her breathing, which was controlled in the way of someone who was working at it. He put his hand over hers on the table, not as a performance, not for the journalists or the board members or the gray March light coming through the windows. He put his hand over hers because her hands were cold, and he was sitting next to her, and it was the only available response to someone carrying something that heavy. She didn't pull away. After a moment, she turned her hand under his and held on. Gerald's attorney finished. The room sat with it for a moment, the particular weighted silence of people processing an argument that has been made effectively. Gerald looked at Olivia. His expression was not cruel. That would have been easier to dismiss. It was something more calculated. The expression of a man who has been patient for a very long time and is now collecting. "I want to give Olivia the opportunity to respond," he said generously, "before we discuss next steps." Olivia stood. She stood without haste, without the bracing quality of someone steeling themselves, and she looked around the table at the people who had been her board for the past 8 years, with the clarity of someone who has decided to stop negotiating with the version of the situation they wished existed. "Everything in that timeline is accurate," she said. The room shifted. Gerald's expression sharpened almost imperceptibly. The marriage was arranged quickly. There was a financial component to the original agreement. "Nathan and I did not know each other well when we married." She paused. "All of that is true. I'm not going to stand here and tell you otherwise, because you're all adults with access to calendars, and you'd know I was lying." One of the board members, an older man named Clifford Marsh, who had been with the company since before Olivia took over, leaned forward slightly. "What are you going to tell us?" he said. "I'm going to tell you that what's in those documents is the beginning of the story, not the whole of it." She looked at Nathan, not the look they'd been performing for months at events and meetings, not the calibrated public couple eye contact, just the way she actually looked at him, which was different and considerably more difficult to produce on demand because it wasn't produced. "I'm going to tell you that I married this man because I was out of options and he was the only person I trusted, and that what happened in the months since has been one of the few things in my life that has been completely and entirely outside my control." Gerald made a small sound, a subtle dismissal. "That's a very touching revision of events." "I'm not finished," Olivia said, without raising her voice. Gerald stopped. "I'm going to tell you that Nathan turned down your offer," she said, and looked directly at her uncle for the first time since the meeting had started. "In February, when your consultant called him and offered him $450,000 to sign a statement confirming this marriage was fraudulent." She paused. "He turned it down. He called me within 3 minutes, and then he told Warren, and Warren documented everything." The room absorbed this. Gerald's attorney looked at Gerald. Gerald's expression had not changed, but something behind his eyes had, a rapid recalculation happening in real time. "I don't know what you're—" "Warren," Olivia said. Warren Cole opened the leather case. He placed 3 documents on the table with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had been waiting to do this for approximately 6 weeks. Call logs. A copy of the communication from Douglas Farr's firm. The recording, which Warren's associate played on a small speaker, Nathan's voice, then Douglas Farr's voice, then Nathan's. "Tell your client that the answer is no, that the answer was no before you finished your first sentence." The boardroom was entirely silent. Then Nathan stood. He stood because he had something to say, and he wasn't going to say it sitting down. And because the journalists were there and the board was there, and Gerald was sitting very still at the far end of the table with the expression of a man who has realized his move has been reversed, and Nathan had something that needed to be on record. "I want to be clear about something," he said. His voice came out level. Not rehearsed, not performed, just clear, the way he spoke on job sites when something needed to be understood correctly. "This marriage started as a legal arrangement. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Olivia asked me because she needed someone she trusted, and I agreed because I saw what was at stake for the people this company serves. That's the truth." He looked at Gerald. Gerald looked back at him with the flat assessment of a man being measured. "Your consultant called me," Nathan continued, "and offered me more money than I make in 3 years to confirm what I just confirmed for free. The difference is that I'm not confirming it because it ends there. I'm confirming it because it's where we started, and where we started is not who we are." He paused. "I turned down the money because I'm not for sale. I'm also not leaving this marriage, not because of a contract. That contract has been over in every meaningful sense for months. I'm staying because of her, because of the family we've built in that house." He looked at Olivia, and this time he didn't measure what he let into the look. "Because I love her. And that has nothing to do with any piece of paper in any folder on this table." The room was quiet for a long moment. Olivia was looking at him. She'd been looking at him from the moment he started speaking, and her face was doing something it did very rarely. The full, unguarded version, no composure left, no professional distance, nothing managed. Just a woman who had been handed something she hadn't let herself expect and didn't entirely know what to do with yet. One of the journalists had stopped writing. She was just watching. Gerald's attorney leaned close to Gerald and said something quiet. Gerald shook his head slightly, a small, tight movement. Patricia Hess looked down the table at Gerald. "Gerald," she said, in the tone of a board chair who has reached the end of her patience for a particular agenda item. "Your investigative team has been operating in a capacity that may constitute an attempted subornation of false testimony. Your consultant directly approached an officer of this company's family with a bribe. Regardless of the questions you've raised about the trust clause conditions, I'm going to need to table the primary motion pending a review of your own conduct in this matter." Patricia, this isn't a negotiation. She folded her hands. "We'll reconvene when legal has completed its review." I'd suggest you speak with your attorneys about the February communication before that meeting. She looked around the table. We're adjourned. Gerald stood slowly. His attorneys were already in motion around him, gathering documents, speaking in low, urgent voices. He looked at Olivia, looked at her with the expression of a man processing that the ground he'd been standing on had just moved in a direction he hadn't authorized. And then he looked at Nathan, and his expression changed again. Not to warmth, not to defeat exactly, to something more like acknowledgement. The way one person recognizes another who has beaten them in a way that was genuinely unforeseeable. He left without speaking. The journalists were still in the room. One of them, a younger man, quick eyes, pen already moving, looked toward Nathan, and Nathan shook his head slightly. Not now. The man took the no gracefully and wrote something else. The board members filed out in small clusters, the audio of their quiet conversations indistinct, but the tenor of them readable. Clifford Marsh stopped beside Olivia on his way out and put a hand briefly on her shoulder and said something Nathan couldn't hear, and Olivia nodded once, and Marsh left. The room emptied down to 4 people, Nathan, Olivia, Warren, and Clara, who had appeared at some point during the proceedings and had been standing near the door with a tablet and the expression of someone who would begin managing consequences the moment she was given the signal. Warren was already making calls. Clara was already composing communications. And Olivia was standing at the long table, her hands resting on its surface, looking at Nathan with the expression she'd had when he was speaking, the unguarded version, the one with nothing between her and it. And she was not composing herself, which was the most significant thing, because Olivia Sterling composed herself the way some people breathed. It was automatic and perpetual and deeply ingrained. She was not doing it right now. "You said you loved me," she said. Not an accusation. Not a question either. The careful, precise way she stated things, she was still deciding what to do with. "Yes," he said, in front of 12 board members and 3 journalists. "That's correct." "You didn't discuss that with Warren?" "No." She looked at him for a long moment. "Were you planning to say it?" "I was planning to say what was true," he said. "That happened to be true, so yes." She exhaled. A slow, quiet exhale that was not quite steady all the way through. "Nathan, you don't have to say anything right now," he said. "That's not why I said it. I said it because it needed to be on record and because I was done pretending it wasn't the case." He looked at her directly. "You can take whatever time you need." She was quiet for a moment. Behind her, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, downtown Hargrove went about its business in the gray March afternoon. And inside the room the quiet was so complete that he could hear the faint sound of Warren's voice from the hallway, low and urgent, already managing the next move. "I don't need time," she said. He waited. "I've known for a while," she said, and there was something in her voice that was careful and honest and slightly rough around the edges, the way her voice got when she was saying something she'd been carrying for longer than was comfortable. I've been trying to figure out whether I had the right to want it. Whether it was fair to you, given how this started." She paused. "Whether I was enough of a real person outside of all of this, the company, the trust, the position, to be what you actually deserve." "You're asking the wrong question," he said. "I'm not looking for a balance sheet." "I know." She pushed off from the table, crossed the space between them, stopped 2 feet away, which was closer than they'd stood in any public context without it being choreographed. And this was not choreographed. This was entirely unscripted. "I'm not good at this," she said. "I'm not." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to be good at it. I love you," she said. Simply. The same simple way he'd said it, without performance, without the buildup of someone who has been planning to say a thing. Just the thing itself, direct and slightly imperfect and completely genuine. "I don't know if I'm doing it right. I don't know if I know how, but I know it's real." He reached out and took her hand, the same way he'd taken it at the table. Not for an audience, not for record, just because it was the available thing, and she was there. She didn't pull away. She looked at their hands and then at him, and the thing on her face was not what he'd expected. Not relief or resolution, or any of the tidy emotional destinations. It was something rawer, like a person who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just, for the first time, been allowed to set it down. Okay, she said, very quietly. Okay, he agreed. From the hallway, Warren called, I need one of you to sign something. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, opened them. The legal ramifications of what just happened are going to occupy the next 3 weeks. I know. And someone is going to write a story. Probably 3 someones. And Gerald is going to regroup. He is. Nathan looked at her. But he's regrouping from a worse position than he started. He's regrouping after the board watched him try to bribe your husband and watched the husband come into a public room and say he wasn't for sale. He paused. There's not a great comeback to that. Something moved across her face that might, in another context, have been called relief. No, she said, there really isn't. Olivia, Warren, from the hall, with more urgency. She looked at Nathan one more time. Just a moment, just a breath of it. And then she was moving, back into the professional frequency, back into the capable and efficient and formidable woman who ran a large company with the precision of someone who understood load-bearing structures. And Nathan watched her go and thought that the 2 versions of her, the composed one and the unguarded one, were not opposites. They were both real. He'd been watching them both for 7 months, and he knew the difference, and he loved both of them. The way you love a complicated building that has good bones underneath the architecture. He followed her into the hallway. Warren handed them each a document. Outside, the gray March sky was starting, slowly, to break. The 3 weeks after the board meeting were not clean or simple, and anyone who expected them to be had not been paying attention to the kind of man Gerald Sterling was. He did not disappear. Men like Gerald did not disappear after a single defeat. They regrouped, they recalibrated, and they came back through different doors. Nathan had said as much in the boardroom hallway, and he'd been right, and being right about it didn't make it easier to live through. Gerald's attorneys filed a formal challenge to the board's adjournment within 48 hours, arguing that the bribery allegation was unsubstantiated and that the underlying question about the trust clause had not been properly resolved. Warren responded with the full documentation package, call logs, recording, FAR's communication trail, the paper history of Gerald's attempts to distance himself from his own consultant, and the exchange occupied 2 law firms and a significant portion of Nathan and Olivia's evenings for the better part of a month. The journalists wrote their stories. 3 of them, as Nathan had predicted, and a 4th that he hadn't. The 4th was the one that caused the most immediate disruption, a longer piece in a business publication that had done more research than the others, that included interviews with 2 anonymous board members and contained a reasonably accurate reconstruction of the marriage's origins, the financial arrangement, and the boardroom confrontation. It was not a hostile story. It was, if anything, something closer to fair. But fair didn't mean comfortable. And the morning it published, Nathan's phone rang 11 times before 8 a.m., starting with Diane and ending with Dale from the construction site, who called to say that several people had seen the article and that he was handling it, and that Nathan should know the crew was solidly in his corner, which was both touching and somewhat mortifying. He told Olivia about the calls over breakfast. She was reading the article on her tablet, reading it with the careful, expressionless attention of someone looking for the exact points of damage, which was how she read things that affected her professionally. How bad is it? He asked. Manageable, she said. Then, after a moment, it's not wrong about much. No. It's also not wrong about the important part. She set the tablet down, looked at him across the table, where Emma was eating cereal and apparently not paying attention, but was absolutely paying attention. What people read about how this started matters less than what it actually became. Lots of people are going to form an opinion anyway. Lots of people always form opinions. That's not new. She picked up her coffee. I spent 10 years worrying about what the board thought of me, what the press thought, what Gerald thought. I made myself smaller in 100 different ways, trying to manage what other people were deciding about me. She paused. I'm done doing that. Emma looked up from her cereal. What are you talking about? Grown-up stuff, Nathan said. About the article? They both looked at her. Priya showed me on her mom's phone, Emma said, with the casual air of a child delivering information they know is significant. She said there was a picture of you and Olivia. She looked at Olivia. You look nice. Can I be done with my cereal? Rinse the bowl, Nathan said. Emma rinsed the bowl, declared herself ready for school, and was out of the kitchen with her backpack before either adult had fully processed the exchange. Nathan looked at Olivia. Olivia looked at Nathan. "She's 7, he said. "She's also going to be fine," Olivia said. "She has an unusually good sense of what matters and what doesn't. Better than most adults I know." A pause. "Better than me, arguably." "She gets it from her mother," Nathan said, and this time he said it without the involuntary flinch that had accompanied mentions of Rachel in the early months. It had softened over time, not disappeared, not covered over, but found its proper place in the architecture of who he was, the way grief eventually does when you stop fighting it and let it be part of the structure instead of a crack in it. Olivia nodded. She'd learned over the months how to receive those mentions, not to overhandle them, not to treat them as conversational emergencies. She just received them, the way she received most things that mattered, quietly, completely, without performing a response. The legal resolution came on a Thursday in April. Warren called at 2 in the afternoon with the tone of a man who had been very busy for a very long time and was finally arriving at the destination he'd been navigating toward. The board's legal review had concluded. Gerald's formal challenge had been reviewed and dismissed. The evidence of the bribery attempt had been referred to the State Attorney General's office for review of potential charges. Gerald had been formally censured by the board and had, that morning, submitted his resignation from the board effective immediately, a resignation that Warren described as strongly encouraged by the remaining 11 members, 3 of whom had apparently been waiting for an opportunity to formalize their existing dissatisfaction with Gerald for reasons that predated this particular conflict. "It's over?" Olivia said on the phone with Warren, and Nathan was standing across the room and watched her face as she said it, watched the careful, controlled composure that had been her default for so long do something complicated and difficult to name. Not quite cracking, not quite releasing, something between the two. "Barring appeal, which I don't anticipate," Warren said audibly. "Yes, it's over." She hung up, stood there holding the phone, said nothing for a moment. "Hey," Nathan said. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in the way of someone who is not going to cry, but whose body is arguing the point. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he agreed. She exhaled, a long, slow exhale, the kind that carries more than air, the kind that releases something that has been held in the body for a very long time. She looked, in that moment, lighter in a way that had nothing to do with physical weight. Lighter in the way of a person who has been carrying a war for so long they've forgotten what it felt like not to be carrying it, and has just now set it down. 10 years, she said quietly. "I have been managing that man for 10 years. Not anymore." "No." She looked at the window, at the April light coming through, which was different from the gray March light that had been their backdrop for the boardroom confrontation. Warmer, more direct, with a quality that suggested things could grow. Not anymore. Nathan crossed the room and put his arms around her, and she let him, which was itself something. Olivia, who was careful about physical contact the way she was careful about most things, who had learned to keep a certain distance as a professional habit. She let him hold her, and she put her forehead against his shoulder, and they stood there in the afternoon light while the tension of 10 years and a legal battle and a marriage that had started as a contract worked its way, gradually, out of her. She didn't cry. He hadn't expected her to. What she did was something quieter and more total, a simple, full release of vigilance, the specific relaxation of someone who has been standing watch and has finally been relieved. "Thank you," she said, against his shoulder. "For all of it." "You did most of it," he said. "I did the easy part. I know what I'm doing in boardrooms." She pulled back enough to look at him. "You did the part I don't know how to do." "Which part?" "Staying," she said, "when it would have been reasonable to go, when it was hard and complicated, and when the version of this you agreed to was very different from the version it became." She looked at him with the directness that had always been her most characteristic quality, unsparing, honest, completely without decoration. "That's not nothing, Nathan. That's the whole thing." He thought about the October parking lot, the trailer, the terrible coffee, the cream-colored document, the 11 days, and the civil courthouse, and the judge who'd seen everything. He thought about blue puzzle pieces on the floor and a geological survey and a lucky eraser with a star on it, and a 6-year-old running down a hallway and a woman standing in a doorway watching her with an expression she hadn't finished understanding yet. It wasn't hard, he said. Most of it wasn't hard at all. She looked at him for a moment, and then she did something he hadn't seen her do before. She laughed, softly, with her whole face, and it was the best version of her laugh, the full one, the unscheduled kind. Liar, she said. Only about that, he said. Everything else I meant. The company stabilized over the following 2 months in the way that organizations stabilize after a significant threat is removed. Not immediately, not dramatically, but incrementally, as the people inside it recalibrate to a reality in which the thing they were bracing against is no longer coming. The Eastfield project resumed full funding. The 14 affordable housing projects that had been living on conditional approval graduated to unconditional. The Ridgemont Commons development, Nathan's original job site, where this had all started in a parking lot on a tired October evening, reached its final inspection phase in May, and Nathan walked the completed structure with his clipboard and his crew and the specific quiet satisfaction of a man looking at something he helped build that is going to stand for a long time. He stood on the 3rd floor of the completed building, where he'd stood on the scaffolding 7 months earlier looking at the tired orange skyline and looked at the same skyline again. Different light now, different season, the same city. He was a different version of himself than the man who'd been standing here in October, which he was still getting used to, not unrecognizable. He was still the same man, still 32, still fundamentally oriented around practical work and his daughter and the specific comfort of things that were solid and real. But there were new rooms in him now. Some of them had been furnished in unexpected ways by a woman who read geological surveys and held lucky erasers and had spent 10 years being the most capable person in every room she walked into while simultaneously being the most alone. He drove home from the final inspection with the windows down, because May and Hargrove was one of the few times the city smelled good. Something green underneath the exhaust, something that reminded you the world was still conducting its ordinary biological business regardless of what the humans were doing on top of it. Home. He still noticed himself using that word. It had started as a neutral designation, the house, the Sterling property, the temporary location of his life for the duration of the arrangement. At some point it had become home without him consciously reassigning the label, the way the most important shifts happen, gradually, thoroughly, and by the time you notice it, it's already been true for a while. Emma was in the back garden when he arrived, which meant school was done, and she had liberated herself into the outside with the focused urgency of a child who spends 7 hours a day indoors and treats freedom as a resource to be maximized. She was doing something with sticks and leaves that appeared to be architectural in nature, a structure of some kind, low and careful, with a logic he could see but couldn't fully decode from the kitchen window. Olivia was at the kitchen island with her laptop, but she was watching Emma through the window with the expression Nathan had first seen in a doorway 7 months ago. That complicated, slightly unguarded thing, the one that she'd learned to stop hiding from him. Final inspection passed, he said, setting his keys on the counter. I know, Clara told me. She smiled at him without looking away from the window. She also told me Dale called to congratulate you and that you told him to put it in the crew meeting agenda, which Dale apparently found very you. It was a group effort. Everything good is, she said. A pause. Emma's been out there for an hour. She said she's building a habitat. For what? She was not specific. He stood beside her at the window and looked at his daughter in the late afternoon light, small and determined and completely absorbed in her project, and thought about the fact that she'd spent the last 7 months in this house and had simply, without apparent difficulty or deliberation, made it hers. She knew where the good climbing branches were in the oak trees. She knew that Mrs. Paris kept shortbread in the second cabinet and didn't mind if you asked for one piece after school. She knew Olivia's coffee order and had twice, with enormous pride, delivered it correctly, and she knew that if she knocked on the study door when the Do Not Disturb light was off, Olivia would stop what she was doing and ask what she needed. Children knew things about people that adults spent years trying to figure out. Emma had known Olivia in the first month. Nathan had needed 7. The contract end date arrived on a Tuesday in mid-October, which was also, though neither of them had planned it or noted it out loud, almost exactly 1 year from the evening in the parking lot at Ridgemont Commons. Nathan came home from the site to find the termination papers on the kitchen island. A neat stack, properly tabbed, with a pen beside them and a sticky note from Warren's office confirming that signature and notarization would formally dissolve the arrangement. Olivia was not in the kitchen. The papers sat in the afternoon light, looking exactly like what they were, the exit. He stood at the counter and looked at them for a long moment. He thought about what he'd agreed to in October of the previous year, the conditions he'd laid out in a tired trailer, the things he'd needed, Emma's stability, his job, the truth. He'd gotten all of them. The year had delivered everything it had promised and a great deal that it hadn't, and the unpromised things were the ones that mattered most. He picked up the papers. He read through them, all of them, carefully, because he was the kind of man who read documents before he acted on them, and had been since the first time he'd signed a contract he hadn't fully read and spent 3 months regretting it. They were exactly what Warren had said they were: clean, complete, an orderly conclusion to an orderly arrangement. He found the shredder in the study, a heavy-duty one Olivia used for financial documents. He fed the termination papers into it page by page, slowly, listening to the machine do its work, and he felt with each page something that was not quite relief and not quite satisfaction, but somewhere between them. The specific feeling of a man who has made a decision he's certain about and is following through on it. He was feeding the last page in when Olivia appeared in the doorway. She looked at the shredder, at his hand, at the last corner of paper disappearing. She looked at him. "Those were the only copies," she said. "I know. Warren has a version on file, but it would need to be—" "Olivia," he said. She stopped. "I'm not going anywhere, he said. Not because of a contract, and not because of a year's end, and not because the trust clause has been resolved, and the legal reason for this ended 6 months ago." He turned to face her fully. "I'm staying because I want to. Because this is my home. Because Emma has already decided this is her home. And I'm not going to be the one who tells her otherwise." He looked at her directly, with the same quality of directness she'd brought to their very first conversation in that trailer. No performance, no management, just the thing itself. "And because I love you, and I told 12 board members and 3 journalists that, and I'm not going to be a liar in front of my daughter." Olivia was quiet for a moment. She had a habit, when something moved her, of going very still first, processing it fully before she allowed herself to respond to it. He'd learned this about her. He waited. "You shredded a legal document," she said finally. "Technically, it was my legal document. I had standing to destroy it. Warren is going to have questions. Warren can send me a bill." She looked at him, and then she crossed the room, and she took his face in her hands, and she kissed him. Not for an audience, not at a charity gala, not in the choreographed performance of a married couple building a convincing public record. Just the two of them, in the study, with the shredder still humming and the afternoon light coming through the window, and it was imperfect and real and entirely without precedent in either of their lives. When she pulled back, there were tears on her face. 1, maybe 2. She'd have denied it if asked, so he didn't ask. "I have conditions," she said. "I'm listening." "Emma gets to keep the oak tree room. Obviously. I'm not always going to be easy to live with. I know that about myself." She said it plainly, without apology, but also without pretense. "I work too much. I go quiet when I'm stressed. I will sometimes manage a problem for 3 days before I tell you I have it." "I know," he said. "I've been living with you for a year. I just want it on record. Noted." He put his hands over hers. "I sometimes leave my work boots by the door and forget to put them away. I don't always talk about things when I probably should. I'm still figuring out how to be someone in a relationship after a very long time of not being someone in a relationship. We're both starting from scratch on some of this," she said. "We are," he agreed, "but we have good bones." She made a sound that was either a laugh or a sob, and was probably both, and he held on to her in the humming quiet of the study, and outside the window the October light was doing what October light does in Hargrove, going gold and long, the specific late afternoon quality that made everything look like it was worth keeping. The wedding, the real one, the one without attorneys and airtight subclauses and a judge who'd seen everything, happened in December on the Saturday before Christmas in the back garden of the house that had become home. It was small in the way that Olivia had once described their civil ceremony to the journalists: small, private, intentional. 22 people. Diane, who cried before the ceremony started and denied it afterward. Dale and 3 crew members from Ridgemont. Warren Cole, who came in his good suit and shook Nathan's hand with more warmth than Nathan would have predicted from a man who communicated primarily through legal filings. Clara, who was efficient even at celebrations and had quietly organized the flowers without being asked. A handful of Olivia's closest colleagues, the ones who had been in her corner for years before Nathan arrived, the ones who knew the real weight of what the last year had contained. Clifford Marsh came. He was the oldest board member, and he'd been at Sterling Development long enough to remember Margaret Sterling, and he stood near the back with a glass of champagne and watched the whole thing with the expression of a man watching something conclude properly. Emma was the flower girl. She had opinions about this role, most of them operational. She'd developed a specific technique for petal distribution that she described as even coverage, and she executed it with the focused precision of a 7-year-old who has been thinking about this for 3 weeks. She wore a blue dress that she'd chosen herself and white shoes that she'd scuffed within approximately 4 minutes of putting them on, and she walked down the makeshift aisle between the garden chairs with the straight-backed gravity of someone who understands the weight of the occasion and is taking it seriously. When she reached the front, she took up her position beside Olivia and held Olivia's hand, and Olivia looked down at her with a look that Nathan caught from where he was standing and that he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. The look of a woman who had been alone in a large house for a very long time and was standing in a cold December garden holding a 7-year-old's hand and understanding, maybe for the first time fully, that this was what all the rest of it had been for. The ceremony was short. Neither of them had written lengthy vows. They'd talked about it and agreed that the elaborate kind felt like performance, and they'd both had enough performance for one lifetime. What they had instead were 2 sentences each, said in front of 22 people and the December oak trees and the cold, clear sky. Olivia went first. She looked at Nathan with the full, unmanaged version of herself. Not the boardroom version, not the public-facing version, not the version that wore charcoal blazers and moved through rooms with complete authority. Just her. "I spent a long time building things without knowing what I was building them for," she said. "Now I know. And I'm not going anywhere either." Nathan looked at her. He thought about everything he could say. The long version, the version that contained October parking lots and geological surveys and puzzle pieces and sick day bedside readings and February bribery attempts and March boardrooms. The whole year of it, with all its weight and surprise, and the incremental, load-bearing truth of how 2 people who had begun as strangers had built something that could hold. "I know what I'm made of," he said, "and I know what you're made of. And I think what we're made of fits together in a way that's going to hold for a long time." He paused. "I'm going to spend however long we have making sure you know you're not alone in this. Any of it." Emma, from beside Olivia, said, "Okay, good," in a tone of someone ticking a box. And the garden laughed, and Olivia laughed, and Nathan laughed, and the officiant, a friend of Warren's who had been brought in for the occasion and who had clearly not anticipated the flower girl editorializing, recovered admirably and pronounced them married. Diane found Nathan 20 minutes later, beside the garden table that Mrs. Parris had arranged with food and champagne, and stood next to him with her glass and watched Olivia across the garden. Olivia was crouched down talking to Emma, both of them apparently engaged in a detailed examination of something on the ground. A beetle, it turned out, which Emma had named Gerald without apparent irony, and which Olivia was examining with complete seriousness. "She's good," Diane said. "Yeah," Nathan agreed. "She's not what I pictured the first time you told me." "I know. You said that before. I'm saying it again because it means more now." Diane sipped her champagne. "She loves that kid." "She does. And she loves you, which is—" Diane paused. "She looks at you the way I always hoped someone would look at you, Nathan. After everything, after Rachel. I wanted you to know that someone else sees it." He didn't say anything for a moment. The December sky was getting dark at its edges, the blue going deep and cold, and the garden lights that Clara had strung between the oak branches were coming on one by one in the early dusk. "Rachel would have liked her," he said. Diane thought about it. "She would have found her hilarious," she said, "in the best way. She would have spent 6 months trying to get her to loosen up and then been completely delighted when she did." Nathan smiled at that, at the truth of it. Across the garden, Emma had apparently communicated something important to Olivia about the beetle. because Olivia was nodding with the focused seriousness she brought to significant information, and Emma was clearly pleased by this response. After a moment, Olivia stood and looked across the garden and found Nathan's eyes, and the look she gave him was the one he'd first seen past the composure all those months ago. Quiet, open, entirely without management. He raised his glass. She raised hers. The oak trees stood in the December light, bare-branched and patient, the way old things stand. The house behind them was lit from every window, warm and occupied, full of voices and the particular sound a house makes when it has enough people in it to be properly alive. This was the thing neither of them had planned for. Not the legal resolution, not the company's stability, not the defeat of Gerald Sterling and the preservation of 4,000 housing units and the thousands of jobs attached to them. Those things mattered. They mattered enormously. But they were not the thing. The thing was this: a man who had spent 4 years moving through his life with his head down and his hands busy, building things for other people, and going home to a small kitchen and a daughter who talked to her dreams, had walked into a construction trailer on a tired October evening and been handed something he hadn't known he was missing. Not money, not stability. Those were real, and they'd arrived, and he was grateful for them, but they were not the center of the story. The center was simpler and harder to name. He'd been handed a reason to let someone in again. And he'd taken it, not gracefully, not without difficulty, but honestly. The way he did most things, with his hands and his full attention and his real self, which was imperfect and steady and enough. And Olivia Sterling, who had spent 30 years being the most competent person in every room she walked into, and the most alone, who had inherited a war from a man who couldn't stand to see her succeed and had fought it for 10 years with the tools she'd built herself, had sat down in a construction trailer and placed a bet on a stranger because her instincts said he was good. And her instincts, after everything, had been the one thing she could still trust. She'd been right. That was the other thing about this story, the thing underneath the legal arrangements and the boardroom confrontations and the year of learning to live inside a life that neither of them had built from scratch. The thing underneath was simple. Sometimes the right bet isn't the safe one. Sometimes the person who shows up for you is the one you didn't see coming in the parking lot of a job site at 8:45 on a Thursday evening, covered in concrete dust and carrying a plate of meatloaf waiting at home. And sometimes what you build together, not in boardrooms, not in construction sites, not in courtrooms or civil offices or legal filings, but in ordinary kitchens and cold December gardens and puzzle pieces on the floor at 11 p.m., is the thing that holds longest. In the garden, Emma came running back to Nathan, grabbed his hand, and pulled him toward the garden table where there was cake she apparently felt was not being given proper attention, and he let himself be pulled because this was what family felt like. Not the polished version, not the performed version, but the actual version, which was loud and imperfect and ran when it should walk and asked too many questions and named beetles after people it found troublesome and loved. When it loved, with everything it had, Olivia appeared at his other side, took his other hand. The three of them stood at the garden table in the December dark, and Emma said, "Okay, who cuts it?" with the authority of someone who has been thinking about cake distribution for 3 weeks. And Olivia said, "Your father cuts it." And Emma said, "No, he always does the pieces uneven." And Nathan said, "They're not uneven." And Emma said, "The piece you give yourself is always bigger." And Olivia said, "That's actually true. I've noticed this." And Nathan looked at both of them and thought about all the things he could say. He picked up the cake knife. He cut the first piece, and it was arguably even, and nobody agreed. And the oak trees stood in the dark above them, and the lights in the windows of the house that had become home burned steady and warm against the December sky. Some things, when they're built right, hold. This one would.